What up? We're starting. Feels so anticlimactic. I think the odd part about this for me is knowing that it is such a small channel. And for me, for whatever reason, deciding we're going to do a live stream, knowing full well that there's very likely to be no one in the chat. But it's humbling. And that's probably good for me. So I'll take it. And as I say that, look at that first comment. What up, bro? There was a comment in here a couple days ago while the live stream was loading that asked me a question, um, and I made an edit on the stream, and so the question disappeared, which I didn't realize is how this worked. So we're learning. So the question, which I'm going to try and just recall by memory to get us going, and that reminds me, I need a way. I had it ready, and look at me, just floundering to actually start here. Okay. I gotta track all the questions that I'm doing in some useful way. So that's important. Hypo. I figured. Okay. So, and just experimenting with a lot of the features here. So you're welcome to ask a question too, Bo. Anyone, and no limit to questions. So the question to start us though that was proposed to me earlier that I wish was still in the chat from a day or two ago. If I remember it properly, it was around something along the lines of what my experience has been like starting this channel and any change or growth I've seen in me from doing so. And the answer is yes, there has been personal change starting it, but I don't know that it's explicitly from the channel. But I'll go into that more. So what I mean by that is essentially the starting point of this was about a year, and hopefully you can hear me. Please let me know if I don't come in very well. Well, you know what? Actually, I can test that with viewing it. This is good. We'll see how this goes. Viewing it. We'll see how this goes. And there it is. It worked. So that'll be a fun feedback loop watching myself. Okay. I started the channel in April of last year. I am in the 50th week of doing this. So if you watch the Monday Musings of a Psychotherapist, episode 50 was this past Monday. And uh, I'm going to probably be more reflective when I do episode 52 here in about 10 days. So we're about a year in, and the goal has never been to just focus on getting the channel going. So I actually have friends of mine who have experience with YouTube, one friend in particular who is doing a ton of YouTube work, and I've asked him for a lot of advice. And one of my biggest wrestles is just, do I apply it or not? Some of it's very useful just in general, but others it comes down to, is this what I want to be doing for the channel? Because the ultimate goal isn't a perfect channel. It's me expressing myself in a different medium, but I also want to grow it and build it in certain ways. So finding that balance. So I think for me, there's been the change and development part to the question is just, what do I want out of this? And realizing that it is important for me to have some outlet. I've talked before, and the link is in all the videos or a lot of the videos to the blog I used to do, which I did that on Mondays, and it was called Monday Musings of a Psychotherapist, just like this channel is. And I might go back and start doing more blog posts simultaneous with the videos. But the point is to just be able to express myself and get thoughts out. Because I'm a pretty deep thinking person and I'm reflective and I like to spend time just thinking through my thoughts clearly. And sometimes having an audience for that is helpful, or just holding myself accountable by having videos I have to do every week or articles I have to write every week. So the main change there has been just reflecting on what I feel like my wants are in regard to putting my face out there, so to speak. So that's the first one. All right. And I'll do what I can to answer any question that comes in through the chat, but I am queued up with Quora, which is where I do most of my questions. I often spend bursts of time there, like a couple weeks or a month or two, pretty nonstop, just answering questions and learning, and then I get off for a while and get back on, get off, get back on. So um, it is something that I go back and forth doing, and it's where I initially started my interest with kind of online engagement. And checking it now, yeah, so I have 113,000, just about 114,000 views on that website, and that's just been trying to have fun. Um, and so I enjoy it. I think um, it's weirdly put together, so it's possible to get into rabbit holes, and it's similar to Reddit and the news, where you get a lot of people whose thoughts or answers are just vitriolic and just crazy. So I can only spend so much time on it before I kind of lose it, um, just because there's a lot of wackiness going on. But I do spend a lot of time just answering the questions, and I try not to read a lot of other people's answers. Sometimes I do just to get an idea of what the questions look like, but I typically lean towards answering questions on there that have no answers, so people just haven't taken the leap to try and answer. Or if I feel like a lot of the answers currently on there are extremely biased in one direction, I'll try to maybe offer a perspective there. So what I'm going to start with, in lieu of chat questions, is just current answers. So I have drafts that I've maybe started to answer but haven't finished. And then I have a request section where people have requested me to answer their questions. And I have tons of both of those. That's enough to fill this whole time. So, question two: can a therapist refuse to see a patient who has been referred by their doctor? Yes, that's an easy one. You already know from what I've said that I'm going to be answering one question for every subscriber. And if you know me personally or watching up these videos, I can take a 5 second or 2 second answer and turn it into 20 minutes. So I might start with more steam than I end with. We're 7.5 minutes in on question two. I can't keep that. We're going to be on here for 10 hours if I keep that pace, but we'll keep it for now. Can a therapist refuse to see a patient who has been referred by their doctor? Yeah. So as a therapist, especially private practice therapists, you can decline anyone. Um, and the issue comes if you're it comes down more to civil rights issues. You can't just discriminate from a pure discrimination standpoint, which is also kind of hard. Like one example is, you can't turn someone away if they're gay, right? That's a civil rights issue. But what if you feel like you're not an expert in LGBTQ plus issues, and they're coming in presenting with that, where they want to work through maybe gender or sexuality? I mean, I would say that's maybe a form of discrimination, but not bad. That could be, I'm not equipped for this. I can sit with you, but I know therapists that are better at this. And I think that's okay for therapists to do if they want to. So that's a uh, hard line sometimes to notice, what's pure discrimination versus just professional competency. This is where it's good to have consultation teams and supervision. But yeah, if a doctor, I'll use myself as an example. If a doctor recommends one of their patients come to see me, I have no obligation to see them. There's maybe some spaces where that's not true if there's a clear partnership between them, like in the same clinic. We're not really supposed to have like referral partnerships. That's considered unethical. But yeah, there's maybe some cases where it's in-house and it's supposed to work that way. But from a private practice standpoint, you can absolutely turn people away. There's definitely kind and unkind ways to do that, but you can. And I'll reiterate too, not all these are going to be therapy related. We're going to start there, but they can go any direction. Question three: I want to leave therapy because I don't feel like I'm gaining enough for it to be worth my money, but I just like my therapist too much and can't imagine going on without her. What should I do? Okay, there's a couple statements in there. I want to leave therapy because I don't feel like I'm gaining enough for it to be worth my money. That's a pretty good sign for most things. If it doesn't feel worth its value, why are we still engaging in it? Um, there must be something else there, right? And in this case, yes, because they go on to say, but I just like my therapist too much and I can't imagine going on without her. So that's your reason why you're doing it. And so technically it is valuable. I don't feel like I'm gaining enough for it to be worth my money. I don't know. It sounds like you are in some sense because of the relationship. Now, therapists are not designed to build a friendship with you. I think it's okay at times if we're the only friendly connection you have to continue therapy while we're helping a client build community and friendships. That's okay. The languaging there is a little bit, I would question the languaging if I was in person with this person of, I can't imagine going on without her. That's a bit coded for potential like self-harm or suicidal thoughts. They might just be implying I I don't want to, like, the thought of continuing my regular life without them doesn't make sense, but that language would be a slight alarm language for me as a therapist to press into more. Um, the "what should I do" piece, I think most of you here will know that I can't tell anyone what they should do as a therapist. However, my recommendation would be to, and you'll probably hear this a lot with therapy related questions, is talk to your therapist about it and bring it up to say, my hope is that they can say this to the therapist. I want to discontinue therapy, but I don't want to end the relationship, which I feel like is the core of this. I don't need the therapy, but I feel like I need a relationship. Um, so I also wonder if the therapist has overly been too much of a friend, and not in a like bad way. We should have a healthy relationship, but there's a friendliness line where we don't want our clients to think we're their friends. We want them to know that they are cared for, and that even maybe outside therapy, we would have potentially been friends. But this is a professional dynamic with hopefully some affection and care in it. So, um, yeah, I would recommend talking to the therapist if at all possible. And another option, if this feels difficult, is to just reduce sessions. So it's also probably not healthy to say, hey, you should just cut it off right away. Because if this is a crutch, then that's important to potentially taper. So that would be one option. If you're going weekly, can you go every other week? Can you shift to every 3 weeks or monthly? Is that an option? But it does sound like building relationships outside of that while you slowly pull away from this one could be a healthy transition. Man, these are kind of hard to do when you're the only one talking the whole time. But only 99 more to go. I need to keep a live footage of how many, what are they called, subscribers I have. We have at least 102. So, next question. Question 4. How many therapists can I talk to at the same time? This is an ethical question, and it's a really good one. I got asked this question in the last week, or a form of it. There's two answers. One answer is one therapist. The other answer is depends on what you're doing. So if you come to see me and you want to work on, let's say, trauma, we're going to focus on trauma, and that's the goal. And you're also seeing a trauma therapist, and we're both focusing on the same trauma. And you tell me that, I'm going to refuse service. I'm going to say you have to pick between me and or the other therapist. The reason is if I'm working through trauma and I might have a certain methodology and approach that I take, and I'm asking you to pull things up and I'm having us go through things in a certain order, in a certain style, and you have another trauma therapist doing it their way, we're working on the same thing. Look at it this way. Let's say you're remodeling a kitchen and you bring in one specialist, one contractor, and they're doing work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then on Thursday, Friday, you have another specialist come in and do their work. And you don't want two different kitchens, but you want them to just, hey, these people can only work Monday through Wednesday. I just want you to come in and keep working on our kitchen Thursday and Friday, but you have no communication. So neither of them have any input on what's going on. The chances of that kitchen ending well, it's going to be a mix, and people's directions and approach are going to be different, and it's not going to work. It's the same here. And even with therapist communication, because you might say, well, those two therapists could communicate, we're still overlapping work. So where I would be okay with this potentially, and this isn't usually my style, but those two therapists could partner up and do co-therapy together. I'm a fan of co-therapy. Uh, typically not with therapists I don't know well, like on a personal and professional level. That's an option. The other option is, and I have done this, is one therapist does trauma work and the other therapist does a separate, completely separate type of therapy. So I've done this before where people needed really intense trauma work, but they also had a lot going on in their day to day. And there just wasn't time in a session to do both. Um, and they needed the specialist for that. And then they had a personal personality connection that was better with different therapists potentially, whether that was me or the other person, because I've done this a couple times. And that therapist works on some of the day to day, and they are aware of the other trauma work happening. And so they don't go into that. You will have some therapists tell you that that's still not allowed. It technically is allowed. It's just something that you have to be really careful with. It's not a bad idea to get extra consent signed and permissions, but generally speaking, I would lean towards one. And if you're seeing two, make sure it's explicitly different, that you and both therapists can explicitly state the difference of those two appointments and that all three parties know that this is happening. So this is a good question. And it does come up more than I think some people would think. Uh, but I've seen it multiple times. So, okay. Uh, it's a funny Quora page called Therapists Exposed. And it's a great place to lurk and just see what clients don't like about therapists and try to learn from that. Um, the common one is money. And that's what this question is. Question five. Do you think, oh, okay, I see you, John. Good to see you. All right. So, the money question. Do you think that therapists are worth, on average, $150 per session? This is a complex one. This is a great 50-hour discussion on what therapists should charge. I told you before, it depends is gonna be an answer that is frequent, but it does depend, and a lot of this depends on the definition of value. So, um, what is worth it to you? So, the example that I use with people is if I told you that there's a 5-bedroom house, perfect condition, nothing's wrong with it, I'm gonna sell it to you for $50,000. That's expensive in terms of just money, right? But you would say, potentially, what's the catch? 5-bedroom, it's perfect condition, no repairs, it's ready to go. Why is it only 50,000? Especially in our market nowadays. You'd be thinking it should be at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, $800,000. So you actually have a red flag potentially as to why is this only 50,000? But if I told you I have this amazing, perfect condition, it's ready to go, it's a t-shirt and it's $1,000. You're like, why? What could possibly make a t-shirt worth $1,000? So the value is attached to perception and subjectivity of what we're referring to. And this is, I really believe this is what's happening a lot with therapy, is people are just thinking price tag. They are not connecting it to what's actually happening, what they're actually paying for. Um, that is not everyone, but a lot of people, when you ask them, well, what do you think you're paying for? They'll just kind of say therapy. I want therapy. I want mental health help. I think one of the biggest detriments in the therapy community is our current inability to effectively communicate what we do to the broader world. And there's a lot of people that say it's worth twice as much as this person asked, and some people that don't think it's worth a fraction of that. So this is just perception. And this is a separate question than people saying it costs so much I can't afford it. That's different. That's not connected with worth. At least the phrasing of this question is, do you think therapists are worth on average 150 an hour? And I think they can be. So therapists need a minimum of 6 years of college. There's pretty much no faster way to do it unless you start maybe your undergrad. That's like with a lot of college credits, but you need the equivalent of 6 years. 4-year undergrad. A lot of people take 5 years now um, to do undergrad degrees. Your post-grad degree, your master's is going to be at least 2 years, minus 23 months. A lot of them are 3 years. If they go on to be psychologists, um, or PhDs in their therapy field, mental health field. That's another. That's not required though, so I'm going to exclude that. If they want to be um, licensed at all, you do 6 years of school ish, and then you spend thousands of dollars on all the training. You have to do practicum work. It's hard to work and put yourself through. A lot of people come out with debt. Most of them do. The ones who don't are typically people who are doing a second career or their spouse is successful enough to pay their way through. And then once you graduate, you have to take licensing exams. You have to pay licensing fees to the state. You have to do that every 2 years in most cases. You have to, if you're in private practice, rent office space. You have to pay to run a business, potentially pay for a business license. You have to keep liability insurance. You have to spend money on everything that the government can possibly find a way to make you spend money on just to be allowed to do your job. And then from there, you have to figure out what you're going to charge. And if you're an agency, you have to do pretty much everything I just said, minus running your own business. So, which is also why people in private practice cost more than agency because they're paying to run their own business, and they're building their practice in a way that's more congruent, typically with what they want to do. Not always. A lot of people in agency love it and it's congruent. They just don't get to construct it the same way. So, it can totally be worth it. And then after all of that, we get into whether or not the therapist is good at their job. Some therapists are bad at their job. I'm a firm believer that currently our education system is putting too many therapists out in the field. The requirements to become a therapist are mostly financial. Actually, in my opinion, the biggest determining factor of if you're going to be able to be a therapist is if you can find the resources to get through school. I've seen a couple people who I personally believe are in no mental position and are not healthy at all in terms of doing this job and shouldn't be doing it. I think there needs to be a lot less people getting accepted into school, and there should be um, a lot more people being removed from programs. Put it that way. There's an oversaturation of people who are just okay at the job or flat out shouldn't be doing it. And in a field that you do behind closed doors in private, it's very hard to have oversight on if people are doing it properly. And you mix that with, I'm getting on a tangent. Some are worth it, some are not. And then a lot of them have sliding scales where they charge less, but some therapists, no, it makes no sense to pay them 150. Other therapists, um, they're giving their time away like charity to charge 150. So the question you have to ask yourself is, if I'm paying $150 for therapy, am I getting $150 back of the life that I want? And then, yeah, maybe it is. The things that I will just throw money at are a reflection of what I value. So, if you have to be talked into it, you probably don't value it. I understand if you have to be questioning, like, I want to value it, but things like I'm saying, is it a good therapist or not? I get that. It can be hard to find the right one, but yeah, man, it can absolutely be worth the price with the right person. Yeah. We're 5 questions the way through and only 23 minutes. I'm going to be on here for freaking 5 hours. That's why I have coffee. Next question. I'm gonna keep going with therapy questions for a little bit because this is fun for me. Till my brain can't ethically answer them probably, and then we'll go into goofy questions. So, from there, question 6: can a client bring in someone else on the first therapy session? Yes. Yeah, in most cases you can. Um, they just have to have paperwork signed appropriately. So for me, if it's a minor, the parents can come in, the guardians. Um, no one else unless we address it beforehand. So if grandma comes along, she's sitting in the lobby unless she signs paperwork. And typically, I don't even like that because to me, that's and I know people aren't active. Some people are trying to do this, not everyone. They're going around you as a professional. So the thing to keep in mind there is that the therapist has to maintain their role as the professional, and they're in charge of the room. They're not controlling and domineering, but they need to be in charge of the healing space. And if someone else imposes on that, they're saying, "I'm in charge," and they're putting themselves in that space, and they will direct the room after that. So, if you're seeing a minor, parents, guardians, they're in the room. Any outside people, you need release of information and consents to come into the room. If you are an adult going to therapy and You want someone in the room, we need to sign paperwork for them to be in the room too. So, and that's HIPAA compliance there. As a therapist, don't let anyone in the room without a consent form. As a client, please don't encourage someone else to come in. I know, like, it makes sense to come in a lot of other doctor's offices. Like, if like I can go to most medical appointments with my wife and just go in with her if we want to, and vice versa. The reason it looks different with therapy is because the healthcare intervention is communicative mostly. So, you know, if for instance, if we were both, if I decided to go to an easy one is like a chiropractor or something like that. It's like, oh, I'm gonna get an adjustment, and maybe my wife comes. She just wants to see what it's like. She can't just be like, "Oh, my turn," and lay down on the table and get adjusted. That's not allowed because the actual medical intervention is what's happening in that moment. So she would have to get consents and any pre stuff done prior. Therapy, the actual medical intervention, so to speak, is the dialogical process happening. So any communication happening in that space is technically utilizing the therapeutic space. Therefore, consents are needed because the whole room is a medical procedure in that sense. So, uh, but yeah, at the end of the day, yes, typically you can have guests in a first session, especially. Are psychologists and therapists allowed to date their clients? Yeah, that's a common question. I'm a marriage and family therapist. There are five main mental health fields: marriage and family therapy, counseling, social work, psychology, and psychiatry. All of them have codes of ethics. I've studied all of them. The answer to this question, I cannot tell you for four out of the five by memory. My field, marriage and family therapy, the answer is no, you cannot date a client. Actually, I can tell you for the direct answer is no for all of them. You cannot date active clients. Some have different rules on how long they can be not a client. So uh, don't quote me on this. I think counseling for counselors, they have to wait 2 years. So some of these have essentially statutes on them of regulation statutes of you can date and have normal relationships or relationships of any kind after a certain period of time. For marriage and therapy, marriage and family therapists, thank you, John, another therapist, counselor, 2 years. So there are some guidelines around it. MFTs, marriage and family therapists, who I am, nope, not allowed ever. Um, so in my opinion on this is super mixed. I 100% get it, and I can understand how that's annoying sometimes. But at the end of the day, the goal is to protect clients and overall client care. If you're having a mindset of I want to date this person in the back of your head, you're like leaning that way. You're like, oh, eventually I could. I don't know. It just maybe sets up potential to be creepy, and so I can understand complete restriction. The people I have the most empathy for with this are people who do therapy with focused communities. Um, I've seen this for maybe it's small towns. I've seen this with LGBTQ plus community. Sometimes people who do focused religious community work. And let's say you're not in a relationship or you're not married and you want to be, and everyone in your dating market is your target market for clients. That sucks, and that happens. So I get where that can be hard for some people, which is also another encouragement for people to maybe try to do therapy um, in different towns than they live in. That stuff gets complicated, but it's just kind of part of what you sign up for with this work. So, okay. Question 7. What is the process to becoming a psychotherapist? I'm very drawn to the role, but really did not enjoy studying statistics/experimental design when I took psychology at college. You don't have to know those things. Um, I love statistics. Um, Admittedly, I'd be guessing to fully understand what you mean by experimental design, but um, every degree is different. Every program is different. My psychology undergrad was a technically a bachelor's of arts or bachelor of arts, whatever that's proper language is. So it was an arts degree technically, and my master's was technically a science degree, master of science. My arts degree, I took quantitative methods. We did a ton of statistics stuff in my arts degree, and in my science degree, we the only statistics that came up were like anecdotal random ones. We didn't study it at all. So I think it does depend. Most of my education in post or not post, yeah, postgraduate. Why am I thinking graduate studies? Geez, in my master's program, most of it was theoretical or practicum, live work. So with very little exception in there. Oh, I need correction. One class was 1 credit hour that was on research, um, and it was the easiest research course I've ever taken in my life. So it depends on the school. I went to Friends University in Kansas City. So yeah, what is the process? You need an undergrad in psychology or a related field. I think that can be subjective. Sometimes sociology counts. Um, Oftentimes, if you don't get a psych degree, though, you have to take required courses. So I went to a master's program where some of my classmates had to go back and take college courses their first year in their master's program. Like they had to go back because their undergrad wasn't in psych. That sounds stressful. So if you know you want to get into this field, just do a psych undergrad. If you're not sure what field, the joke when I was going to school at least was if you don't know what you want to do for a living, get a degree in psychology or business because you can use them everywhere. So half of my class like was like, I'm gonna be a doctor, I'm gonna be a researcher, and the other half was just like zoned out waiting to go to a party. So it was a really weird mix of people, and that's extreme, but you get the point. So um, undergrad in psychology, and then you need a master's of whatever the therapeutic subfield is that you want to be in, and that can be hard for people. I'm biased and think you should be an MFT. Uh, I'm sure that bias is consistent with everyone else and their respective degrees. I think there's a counselor listening right now, so he might be biased towards counseling. It's fine. Just look at the I would recommend looking at the ethics codes, looking at whatever state you want to work in and what their um, potential regulations, statutes, and laws are for like I'm going to stick with the master's level psychotherapy, MFTs, counselors, social workers. There are psychologists that are master's level psychologists. I don't know that I would recommend that if you want to be a therapist, though. Do the other three probably. And it just depends. MFTs used to be set aside because we studied systemic work. So MFTs were really the driving force behind expanding therapy to not just one person in the room, but maybe the family or maybe other people, and to consider what else is going on. So someone coming in and not just saying, um, "You seem a bit crazy," but to think, what's going on in your home, what's going on in your neighborhood, what's going on with the government and broader scale. You look at systemic framing. Most of the programs do that now, but MFTs, that's why it's MFT, marriage and family therapy, because marriage and family therapies were not normal. So that was the distinct factor. Now it just sounds weird to people because now they just think that's all you do, but that's what we're stuck with. So most of them teach systemic frameworks now. So you're really just getting nitpicky with preferences at a certain point. I do think if you go the social work route, though, you're going to be more inundated with social justice type teaching. And so, if that's probably better if you want to do what we might traditionally think is social work versus therapy. I actually wouldn't recommend getting a social work degree to be a therapist. I know social work therapists that are great. I think you're going to get more like therapy focus if you do counseling and MFT. So, but again, just look at the universities around you. Try to talk to people that are in your area doing it, and that's the route to go. So, another question in the comments. I have a question that is slightly related. What is something you wish you knew earlier when becoming a therapist? There's probably a couple things. I think this one, I don't know, this is the first thing that comes to my mind, and it might not be my full answer. But I remember thinking just out of curiosity, I'm like, this is a field that you get really vulnerable and private information from people. And I found that curiosity of, what kind of depth of understanding of the world will I get because people are trusting me with information. Um, just the same way that maybe like law enforcement or military is going to get exposed to potentially a certain type of violence or stress that the average person won't see ever. There's like that kind of curiosity. I'm like, what is the the depth of essentially this pain that I will see. Um, and as therapists, we're not allowed to just go tell all our client stories, but I did wonder that, like, years down the line, if someone were to say, "Hey, what's the hardest story you've ever heard?" I'm like, I wonder what an answer would be. And when I started doing this, and this happened in my internship, actually, many of the hardest stories I've ever heard were in my internship program. And I was like, what would be the hardest thing I could hear to share with someone? And you don't know what you don't know. And so I heard one story stands out, and I would feel so gross just repeating what happened. So, um, like, that was my moment of like, oh, like the hardest thing to hear is actually something that I wouldn't ever say. So, uh, something I think is important to know there, and that I kind of wish maybe I would have known, is that you have to be all in with willing to accept the absolute destruction and trauma and violation that people can create on other people. And you will hear that firsthand. And we think about that. And I want to assure anyone who listens now or later, whatever you think the answer to that is, it is worse than that. So I just being clear with people, and that's kind of maybe what I would do back to people as my own antidote for myself is like, you have to know how to separate this from your regular life. And some people get really fantastic therapy stuff, and it's a lot more. I mean, people don't come in because they're having the best time of their life, but some stories are easier for sure. But you don't always know the story. And even someone who sounds like it's not going to be a big deal, whatever they're working on in terms of like intensity, there's a curveball that can just be brought up, and it's insane trauma or an incredible struggle. And that's hard. So I think having a better idea of the um, just the atrocity in storytelling you can hear. So a bit of a downer, I guess, but it's one of my encouragements to a lot of people. That I actually don't recommend this field to most people, and I think most people should not do this work. Um, and people I think are maybe overly excited and encouraging about it. It can be really hard. I think you need to make sure you have a capacity. And for people who are caretakers, which a lot of this field brings in caring people who are a little bit more sensitive and emotional, that's maybe not a good mix if you're very sensitive and then you hear awful things. So I think knowing in advance that if you are sensitive, do you have a capacity to hold and not self-destruct with what you're holding, and be discouraged by the world when you hear that. But can you instead hear that and view yourself in a situation as a hopeful beacon forward? So yeah, uh, I like I said before, John, there's probably a couple other details in there that I can think of, but that story comes to mind a lot when people ask me to reflect on getting started. So, yeah, good question. And I'll answer it again if more thoughts come back later because I know there's more in there, but I don't want to spend too much time in silent reflection. So, um, ooh, I will say one more thing to it. I wish I would have known how many people would try to gaslight you into thinking that this work was very self-sacrificial and that you have to accept being poor your whole life. There's so many people that say that. And self-sacrificial in the sense of you need to be ready to just not make a living or not have boundaries and free time. Bad advice. You can absolutely do this work, respect your clients, and at the same time, um, do okay financially and take care of yourself and your family and have professional boundaries. That doesn't mean professional boundaries will be hard or easy necessarily. It's challenging. It doesn't mean we're always going to have pathways to the finances that we want. Sometimes we have to decide private practice, agency, this route, this route. Maybe I do this part time or not. But there's a really big narrative that um, we should make no money and that we should just be available all the time. And there's definitely room for people who have a lot of availability. Those people are amazing. That's actually a lot of social work. People have set themselves up for availability. And if you can do that, and that's you giving yourself permission to do that, not having it forced on you, fine. If you're in a position where you can offer uh, access that way, I know a lot of therapists who I don't know a lot. I know a handful that their spouse makes a lot of money and they can afford to charge less, and their family's okay. Fantastic. So it's personal. I just don't think there should be a narrative that says you have to have these experiences. So, um, yeah, just an encouragement for anyone getting into it. You'll probably hear those narratives. Maybe not a lot. My experience was a lot, but it's the majority of people, I think, in this field. The majority think that way. So, okay. Question 10. Just chugging along. At this rate, we'll be done in 400 minutes. Good stuff. I'm actually having fun. I know I sound like I'm whining. Therapist is not trained to treat a certain client. Is it unethical for them to accept that client? Uh, yeah. Yes, it is. So, um, it's plain and simple, but that line can be hard. Um, we actually talk about this a lot when we're training interns, because technically students are not trained. They're not specialized. So why do we let them see clients? One is they're supervised. So whether that's live supervision or like with most people, it's reviewed supervision where we watch case studies or watch videos of their cases or just review them verbally. So they have oversight. But yeah, there's a line. And honestly, most therapists practice outside of their scope. Um, and I think that's an issue of having a lack of clarity with even more subfields. I'm not a big fan of creating more segments, but if I say I'm a therapist, I've met therapists who've never seen a couple. They've never in their training seen a couple. And if you say, "Oh, I'm a therapist," it's possible that some people will be like, "Can you do couples work for us?" And they'll say, "Yeah, I can do couples work." They should not be doing couples work. They have no idea what they're doing. They've never seen a family, they've never seen a couple, they've only seen individuals. They shouldn't see a kid either. Like, it's just too broad. I wish we could specialize a little bit more, and you can get postgraduate specialties. Like I'm a play therapist. I'm not a registered play therapist because the application process is a nightmare, and I'm not interested right now. But that is my specialty, and I'm very well trained in working with kids. And when I hear other therapists say they work with kids, I can tell really quickly whether they're trained because I'm specially trained. And so, does that mean they shouldn't work with kids? I don't know, but I can tell you that a lot of the therapists that I hear who work with kids that I'm probably gonna do a better job because they're not trained. And there's a lot of examples of me and work that I could do, but I'm not trained. So I do think as a therapist, you should specialize. I think that is a wise decision. And a focused therapist offers better work than a generalized therapist. 9 times out of 10, I would say. It's a fake statistic, but often. Um, so yeah, it depends on what you need. I mean, if you're just like I'm stressed out a lot, you don't need to see an anxiety specialist. But if you get far enough in and you learn it's an anxiety disorder and you do need focused care, you maybe should. I see this a lot with ADHD. Some people just want help with ADHD, and technically, as a therapist, you're supposed to be able to treat that. It's in the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. We're trained to technically diagnose it and treat it, but there's legit specialties, and people do a really good job. So, as a therapist, ask questions on the phone, understand the client. As the client or prospective client, if it's important for you to have specialty, please be assertive on the phone and self advocate and ask questions. If it's important that your therapist knows something or can do something, ask them about it. Because some of them honestly will accidentally practice unethically. That's just, I think that's how it goes. And that's not an oh no nightmare thing. There's just fine lines sometimes before acting within your scope or not. Again, let's say you're working on anxiety, and you are a specialist in anxiety, maybe. And then you find out through therapy, you're 6 months into therapy with someone, and then it comes out that they've had extremely traumatic points in their past, horribly traumatic, and they need intensive care. You couldn't have known that. So then we can try to figure out, is there anything I can do, or do we need to get you referred to a specialist? Or do what I mentioned earlier. We'll keep working on the anxiety and the specialist will work on the trauma. So yeah. Yeah. Next therapy question. What happens during a regular therapy session? What do therapists talk about with their patients? Uh, you can find videos on YouTube. If this question is like just a genuine curiosity because you're interested in therapy, there's actually uh, this happened more in the past, I think, than it happens now. So some of it's old, but it's not maybe old, but not outdated. You can actually look at sessions, not because they used to be public. These are people who agreed to be recorded and put online, or some therapists used to do live sessions. I think Esther Perel has there's an HBO show. She was doing some couples therapy. I didn't watch it, but I think she's got some live stuff. People sign consents. I don't know how much the modern stuff tilts into reality TV, but if you watch the stuff from a couple decades ago, kind of pre-reality TV era, it's I think a little bit more authentic. Um, Carl Whitaker has stuff that you can watch. Gottman, their research, a lot of that's public. So I would actually encourage you to go watch it because you actually just can watch. Um, but from my perspective here, having both done this for a long time and watched hours and hours of other people doing therapy, both in training and supervising, it depends again, but consistent things are that your therapist is leading. Now, I take a collaborative style, so I might encourage my clients to bring stuff, but there shouldn't be a moment where I just go like, "Well, what do we do?" And that happens occasionally with people who are just unresponsive in therapy, but it's a relational dialogue that should have a tinge of professionalism. So you should feel like the person cares about you and has your best interest in mind. But you should also remember that you're paying them at the end of the day. And I think Freud, he actually had, I don't know if he did this always, he talked about your client should show up and they should put the money on the table between the two of you. So that way they would always be aware that they're paying you and remember this is a transaction. Yes, my therapist cares about me, but I'm paying to be here. And I think he believed that that was, um, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a way to really reinforce that this is a paid healthcare interaction that's professional. We're not friends. This is me helping you remember that you're paying me and put it on the table before we start. So it's a unique approach, and I don't hate it. So yeah, I think that dynamic should be felt that you're paying to be there and that this person cares about me. So yeah, what happens during a regular therapy session? Ideally, you're focusing on goals. Maybe the first couple ones you figure that out a little bit, but really by the end of the first session, you should have an idea. You should be able to know where you're going, and hopefully, you should be able to tie each session back into the goals and the direction. Um, some maybe more than others. Sometimes there's a couple goals, but I think it's good that either you or the therapist could summarize at the end. This is how this connects to why you are here. What we've talked about from day one, or what we've reassessed and talked about. So, and the second part of that question was why do therapists? Uh, well, what do therapists talk? I thought it was a why. What do they talk about? It just depends on your goals. So, and I forgot to put a tally, so now I actually don't know what question I'm on. I think that was 11 though. It was, yes. So yeah, it depends, but it should be very goal focused on what you need. So there's going to be different styles, very professional and direct in like even homework giving versus laid back and you almost forget you're in therapy at times. That can happen. So go watch videos online, and if you know therapists, talk to them. Um, I will hopefully put an answer in this later. So next question, question 12. What do therapists do after sessions are over? So on a typical day, it's common, and this is one of the reasons if you look at um, a therapy hour, it's rarely an hour. Rarely will you do 60 minutes. You'll usually do 50. Sometimes you'll do 45. That's what I do. Other therapists do that, but most do 50. And technically speaking, technically the 10 minutes at the end is for them to do notes. So some therapists have their computer out in front of them the whole session and take notes and type stuff. I do that often. Sometimes mine's down the whole time, sometimes it's up. But that time between is to get your session note done, or progress notes specifically. Those are ethically required to be done within 24 hours of the session. And so that's a designated time to do them. And it's a designated time that insurance accepts and allows to. They understand that we need that time. So if you go for 50 minutes, insurance counts it as an hour. I think generally speaking, I don't know if there's exceptions to that. There might be, but I think actually my appointment, like 45 minutes, I think I might have trouble with insurance paneling. They might consider it that I shouldn't be paid the full amount. So you can bear that in mind. But and then snacks and bathroom. Sometimes decompressing. If you have a really hard session, some people will maybe take a power nap or they'll just like collect themselves before the next appointment. So there's lots of different things that people might do, but the technical purpose of that time is to get your notes done. Um, and if you're at a more group or collective practice like mine, you might chat with some people between the session. Sometimes cleanup. I'm a play therapist, so sometimes there's play related items that need cleaned as well. Uh, and things like sand tray therapies. There's a couple things that I'm trained in, which have also motivated 45-minute sessions. So not everyone uses stuff in my room, but a good amount of my session stuff is being used, and it makes it a little bit less rushed to have some time to clean. And it's pretty rare that sessions end for most people right on the minute. Um, there's usually 1 to 3 to 5, and if you're having fun, you just go way too far past it. I shouldn't say having fun. That's usually a boundary issue with people. Sometimes it makes sense to go further, other times it doesn't. But there's also a little bit of catching space there too. Of it's not always appropriate to tell someone to just stop talking right at the minute marker. So yeah, that's what therapists do after sessions over. At the end of a day, therapists have lots of different rituals that they do. Some have like prayer and meditative practices. Some they have a long drive home and they can decompress. Others live close to home and they maybe go on a long walk or go walk around somewhere and decompress from the day, depending on what input has happened. So having certain rituals can be really helpful for certain therapists. Um, okay, next question, question 13. Is it unethical for a graduate student in counseling to belong to the same professional organization as his or her therapist? What are the potential penalties for the therapist if the client/student were to join, thereby creating a dual relationship? Um, Professional organization. So if it's the same professional organization as your clinical degree connects to, it's not an issue. It's just going to happen. So if I'm a therapist and I'm a part of my um, national organization, and one of my clients is becoming a therapist and they're a part of it too, that's I mean, you're not required to be a part of these national organizations, but or professional organizations, but that's super normal. Sharing that stuff's not a big deal. I think the issue comes in if it's maybe non-therapy or very small professional groups, then then we're essentially just answering the question of dual relationships. So, uh, I hope this doesn't count as cheating, but I'm gonna count this as 2 questions. One is, what if it's the same professional group? Um, it's fine. It's not a big deal, don't worry about it. That's gonna happen. But a dual relationship in overlapping groups that you participate in can be an issue. Um, on a large scale, you're both subscribed to the same magazine, whatever. Um, both of your kids are in the same broad scale premier soccer league, whatever. Maybe you and the person are both in the same. Um, I was going to be a little bit too specific. Maybe you and that person are both in the same music scene in town. Maybe you go to a lot of the same concerts. Maybe you both have bands, and there's a lot of overlap. I don't know. You start to get a little too connected there, maybe. So there's subjectivity. One of the lines that I use to better understand dual relationships is, what are the likelihood that you both will show up to the same party, like a house party, so your birthday party or a get together or a baby shower. Like, what are the chances that you have maybe 2 degrees of separation between you and a friend? So, oh, my friend's inviting me to their get together, and they also invited that person because we kind of share the same groups. If there's a decent risk of being invited to the same events, so I would pump the brakes on that. Now, very often what happens is you say yes to these cases before you understand the overlap. And as therapy goes on, you start to go like, "Oh, shoot, this is connected." I've had that happen before, and then you have to find a way to navigate that. Either we ensure that we're not at the same things, or a potentially more safe thing, if you catch it early on, to say, "Hey, I think we're gonna have to." It's maybe wisest to find you another therapist. So at that point, it turns into a conversation, and ultimately, there are cases where some people have to just really uncomfortably say, "There's a conflict of interest, and we have to terminate." So sucks, but it happens. Next question. Why are therapy intake sessions so much money, sometimes being more than each session that will follow? Some of them are. Some people charge less for their first session. This is part of the personal policy and subjectivity of the field. So, um, I actually used to think it was crazy to charge more for a first session. I'm like, you're not getting people in the door. I've come around on that. My sessions are all the same price. Um, but the reason why people usually charge more is it's simply more work. That's ultimately what it is because it takes effort to do consultations and to do the email correspondence and to interact with you. We usually front load interaction. It's typically once a client is established, we're not interacting with them a lot between appointments, but getting them started. Um, and it depends on how you get people started, but there might be a phone call, some emails, maybe another phone call, and more emails, paperwork being signed. Maybe they didn't get the paperwork done. Hey, a reminder, get the paperwork done. We get the paperwork back. We have to review it. If we're having you do assessments, we have to grade the assessments. So, a therapist who just charges more for the first session just because, I think that's maybe not appropriate. I'd be willing to hear people out on the context. A therapist that charges more because they can actually tell you how much more work they're doing, that should be the line. I think you should be able to say to a therapist, "Why do you charge more for the first session?" And they should be able to say, "It's because I'm doing this, 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 this." Then I think it can be fine. Um, Now, the person asking, I don't know what dramatic differences they've seen. So I've seen some people before, they're $120 for their session, but the first one's 150. I think that can be totally appropriate, especially if you're going through a ton of paperwork and you're onboarding people. Um, I'm much more okay with it now as I've reflected on it and seen it in practice more. And I think it can be a good way to filter out people who aren't taking it seriously. Um, Another way to do that is to actually charge before the first session, which sounds crazy. Um, but to say, hey, this is the essentially retainer starting fee. And this is just a style thing. I'm not like endorsing it, but this is why people might do different things. So but yeah, not everyone does it. At moment of recording, I don't charge any different for a first session than I do a later session. Whatever our agreed upon fee is, that's what you pay. So, um, yeah, mine's the same. So, next question. And let's see. Can you list some things that a therapist wishes they could tell their client but can't? That's pretty funny. I think there's a way to answer this like in a fun way and a serious way. Um, we talked before, I think there's some therapists that if you go back to dual relationship ones, they maybe want to express their interest in the person as a human being. So, oh, I also do that activity. Maybe you shouldn't dive into that, or maybe diving fully into personal beliefs because they love sharing it. So there's a personality thing there where some therapists that are very maybe charismatic and social need to pull back. Um, the yeah, the dual relationship pieces earlier. If you want to date your client, you should not say that, and you should probably start finding a way to stop seeing them because you're not going to be able to do appropriate work. I think the serious answer though, man, I think sometimes we really just want to tell you the answer um, and give you advice. Now that's bias, uh, but the amount of times that I've seen a client and I just in my mind I'm like, I know what you need to do, um, but I don't tell them because it's not my job, and they've come back months to years later and looked at me and been like, "You knew I needed to do this, didn't you?" I'm like, "Yeah," and now that you might hear that and think, "Why wouldn't you just tell them?" This is why. One, they have to make their decision, and sometimes they have to come to that understanding themselves. And if they trust you for input and you say, "Do this," that's your decision. Now, they do get to choose if they accept it, but you're saying, "I would do this." Second reason, you could be wrong. The last thing you want to do is tell someone what to do and you're wrong. And the reason those things are relevant, because I guarantee if you're listening, you can think of like, yeah, but third is we are being paid to help guide them in a way that is set with therapeutic standards. We're not giving answers and we are not giving advice. We give maybe research results, maybe anecdotes of what other people have done, even things we've done. and we pursue theory. We don't go in as advice givers. So that's important to know. I think that happens a lot. We want to say what we feel and think and know, but we are limited. And at the end of the day, they need to go where they want to go and where they're being encouraged by that inner voice and that part of them that they're working through and wrestling through to blossom in the direction that they're supposed to go. And it's way more empowering for that to blossom than to be dragged by the therapist's advice. So there's a couple in here from Therapist Expose, and all it says is Therapist Expose without a question. Um, I'll do a couple more therapy ones, and then we'll mix it up to some fun ones here in a second. What are the benefits? Wait, okay. No, I gotta go back. I skipped one. My now former therapist cut off therapy with me because I refused to do prolonged exposure therapy with her. I thought prolonged exposure would make me worse, not better. Was this ethical on her part? um, so exposure therapy can be useful. We as therapists do not get to tell you what therapy you have to do. We can tell you what we do. There's a lot of therapists that just say, if you do or do not do this, I'm not going to work with you. That's a really hard line to draw, and I think a lot of people draw it in the wrong place. I want you to think about like a parent who tells you, um, you know, if you don't go down this career path or if you don't live your life this way, um, you're not welcome in my home anymore. Think about it from that perspective and when it's okay to draw that line as a healthy parent. And my response is rarely is that a helpful line. So when you think about it from that perspective, we need to be really careful with what we say. I'm not going to see you anymore. And it's different to say, I can't start this relationship. I really think this is the intervention you need. If you're not interested in that, I'm probably not the best fit for you. But if we're deep into therapy and we're telling someone this is what you need, and I'm not going to work with you if you don't do this, you got to know for a fact that not doing that is going to hurt them, in my opinion. Typically, I only forcibly stop therapy when I feel that continuing is hurting them or that I am now practicing unethically. I can't think just I have my shortcomings, but I can't think of a moment where prolonged exposure therapy is like life or death. So, you know, um, yeah, so sorry that that happened. Just in the description of the question, I lean towards this was maybe unethical, but again, this is just a question being asked. It's one perspective, and it's not the full picture. But yeah, so that is that one. And then hello, Brandy, and goodbye, John. You'll be back with a different question. Looking forward to it. Sweet. All right. Next therapy question. And for those joining, we're heading into question 18, and we're just going to keep going until I get through one question for every subscriber that I have. And last I checked, I have 102, unless it has gone up secretly. No, we're at 102. So yeah, we're slowly chipping away. Question 17. What are the question 18 actually. A little bit closer. What are the benefits and risks of stopping therapy? If you're done, very high benefit, stop therapy. If your work isn't done, it depends. Sometimes it's not that harmful to stop. Um, I would say if you're committing to therapy, commit. Don't do this with a half heart. Um, if you're really deep in the middle of something, and specifically trauma, I'm usually clear with clients. If we're working on trauma, do not quit. You cannot quit. And the risk there is not for me. I'll be fine. But you bringing up the past in a traumatic way to process through, and then deciding you're done, your unconscious self and the back of your mind part of you might say, Actually, I'm not done. And traumatic memories might come back. Panic attacks, anxiety attacks, nightmares. You lay your head down to go to sleep and you're re-traumatized by the memories. So, uh, in terms of working with trauma, the risk of stopping therapy is, I think, high. Um, but ultimately, it just comes down to what you're working on, what's being done. Um, Benefit and risk of stopping therapy, it so depends on the person and what they're working on, and again, what is needing done, what still needs done, um, whether you plan to come back or not. So it's something that hopefully you can have a conversation with your therapist about, and just see where you're at and what makes sense. Okay. Next question. And if you're joining, you are more than welcome to ask your own questions, therapy related or not. Doesn't really matter. Toss them in. I'm mostly doing therapy now, but we're going to shift it up in a second. So, why will no one admit that therapy doesn't work for some people? Therapy does not work for some people. That is true. This is just a question, so I don't know. Probably just not talking to the right people for that. Because some people will tell you it never works actually, and that it's fake and we're quacks. So um, it just depends. So therapy absolutely does not work for some people, and I am not quick to recommend therapy to most people. Um, I think a lot of people are really quick to just act like everyone should have a therapist, like maybe how rich people always have a lawyer kind of thing. Therapy can be good. It can be good to have therapists, but we don't always need them. And it isn't always helpful, especially if you get a bad fit. Because therapists are people and they do have biases. So you can get one that just has a completely different worldview than you, and that they're actually practicing out of a worldview, not a theoretical lens. Their lens is actually a philosophical lens that is based in an ideology or belief, and that contradicts with yours at times and is just combative. So that happens. Um, it happens a lot, especially from social perspectives. So people who come into therapy with a social lens maybe have very specific opinions about things like race, gender, government, religion, and general politics. And in their mind, there is a correct way to act within those things. And they'll make sure that you know it. And they'll disguise it as a theoretical lens. Um, and a lot of people do this. And so you can have one of those experiences and it's horrible. You can also go to a therapist that is just phenomenal and you don't really need it. It's covering for something else. Now, hopefully, that therapist, if they're really good, can identify that, and then maybe you do need it because you're hiding something. And but yeah, sometimes it doesn't work, and you just have to be honest with yourself about that. So yeah, I don't disagree with that. Okay. Um, Question 20. What are some non-religious forms of therapy? Most of them are non-religious. So um, typically, when you're thinking religious therapies, uh, we're looking more at like pastoral counseling kind of stuff, especially in the U.S. Western. That's mostly what it's going to be. Uh, the language here was religious. There are a lot of therapists who mix spirituality in, um, and maybe what have I seen before? I've seen people using like spiritual cleansing or more tarot style stuff, and that's super unethical. That's not what you're paid for. Um, I'm a Christian person, and I can't. If I let in with like this is what the Bible says about that, that's ethical strike. That's not actually, and I'm actually technically not trained at all. I have a secular degree. People have pastoral degrees. That's what they're supposed to do. And they're acting unethical if they do what I do. Some people have both and can mix that, and that needs to be clearly communicated. So, most forms of therapy are non religious. So, to be specific, though, what are some non religious forms of therapy? So, typically, if it's psychotherapy, it is, which is the technical term for the work that I do, it's non-religious, and you're getting into a question of theory. So I practice using collaborative language systems as my approach. I also utilize a lot of symbolic experiential therapy. Those are my kind of mixed, unified approaches. Popular ones are emotionally focused therapy, EFT, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. There's also DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. We have Gottman approach is really popular for couples. Prepare and Rich for premarital counseling for couples. We have IFS, which is internal family systems, which is gaining popularity, doing parts work. Bowenian therapy is maybe not as explicitly stated as a theory, but it's another pretty popular one. So there's just a lot of different ones. Motivational interviewing, it's really popular, and no therapist will learn all of them in school. There's actually hundreds technically, but there's only maybe a couple dozen mainline ones, and even less that are evidence based, which is ironic to say that most are not. Most are theory. People are like, maybe this works, and then they're like, it does work a lot of the time. Evidence based are nice, so you can just look that up. Evidence based theories of mental health or evidence based psychotherapies. So that's a good way to look at it. Okay, so let me see if I can find some non therapy related questions on my For You page. Okay. These are related to the channels that I'm on. Um, and then we'll maybe branch it out a little bit further here. And again, if you're in the comments, ask a question, have some fun. Um, where's a non therapy one? Different channel. There we go. We mostly do therapy stuff on this page. So here's a fun one. What is your teenage dream that you have or haven't achieved yet? This is, I like this question. My teenage dream. A really big one is the first job I want to do is being a writer. Uh, Not true. Well, kind of like creator, but the first um, what am I trying to say? Like, I think I could make money at this and do this for a living with music. Um, I loved writing as a kid and doing movies and stuff too. But music was the first one. Um, and eventually I read a book, Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks, which everyone should read. And he talks about music in the brain. I'm like, this is cool, music and the brain connect. And then that led me to The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge about neuroplasticity. And this was early neuroplasticity, so it's a little bit more understood and accepted now, but it was a bit more experimental when I read it. And his book was like the one of the earlier like this is a thing books, and that made me think psychology. I'm gonna do mental something brain. So I kind of put um, the music stuff on hold. And so when you think about like dreams that you have or have not achieved, being a musician was one of them. Like I play in a band and I maybe go on tour and do stuff. And I don't go on tour, but through just the course of life in Providence, I now play 1 to 2 music sets a week. Um, and it's just been a huge blessing to curve back around to that and have the opportunity to have music be an incredibly integral part of my life now. Um, and yeah, it's just been cool to see that kind of come back to me in a way that I haven't been horribly active. I haven't been like trying to be like, how can I make this work? It just has come back around. So that's childhood, teenage dreams specifically, actually, that has come back around. And I would say I've achieved it. There's more to get, but um, I have done it and I have bigger goals with it, but I've made it as far as I'm concerned. So that's really cool. So more, okay. This is a couple questions on like writers and authors. I mentioned writing earlier. I'm in a similar page. So another question, and this is worded weird, so I'm gonna do my best with it. What are the good words to appreciate someone's writing? I'm going to interpret that as what are words that you can read in order to appreciate someone's writing? Um, I think writers that teach you new words are worth appreciating. And now that's not writer specific. because you might just not know a lot of words. And so you might learn a lot of words from this writer, and someone else reads it and knows every single one. So, but anytime you can read and learn a new word, I think it's really, really cool. And it's indicative perhaps of the writer's prose. Um, I think if you can read a book out loud and not in subjective to reading struggles and dyslexia and things like that, for the most part, if you can read it out loud and not stumble over your words, they have a really good flow. Um, there's a writer, Jay Bonanzinga, who I was a huge fan of The Walking Dead when I was younger, well into adulthood, but younger. I enjoy it now, but I kind of ravished the show and the comics and all that. And there was the writer that Robert Kirkman partnered with Jay Bonanzinga to do a couple novels. The novels ultimately ended up being an 8-book series. Robert Kirkman partnered for the first 4 of them, followed primarily the governor as a villain from that series, and then continued on with a different character later. So he co-authored them, and then this other author continued the next 4 to finish out the series. And I just was a fan of The Walking Dead, so I'm like, if it says The Walking Dead, I'm gonna ingest it, essentially. Um, no pun intended for the visceral image. And the dude's writing was just really impressive to me, and I don't understand where he came from, and he doesn't put out stuff that's really popular for the most part. I mean, he's a writer, he's making a career of it, but it's just really good, and I learned new words reading his books, and I just was at the time at least, and I haven't read one for a while, I might feel different now, but I was kind of blown away. I'm like, this is tie-in media. Like it's a company trying to make money off the name of The Walking Dead, like, and this dude just goes really hard in his writing and is like he's like, "I'm gonna do it actually well," and he does. It's fantastic. It's I recommend people read it just because of his writing, not because of the story, which the story is made better because he's a good writer, but, um, to not read it as tie-in media, like, the dude just writes well, so I love that. Um, um, ooh, okay. What's the difference between wanting to be a writer and actually being one? So if you're unaware, I would consider myself a writer. I've made $0 from it. I don't publish. I have a couple things on Reedsy. If you aren't familiar with Reedsy, go check it out. Reedsy. I love their website. I haven't been on it for a while, but they do like weekly prompts and you write a short story and publish it by the end of the week. It's fun. If you're a writer, it's a very good stress test for your ability to write. And said before, I used to do a lot of blogs, so I like writing. It's a freeing part of who I am. It's why I accidentally mentioned writing a couple minutes ago. So what's the difference between wanting to be a writer and actually being one? So the difference is just your decision. You are the only difference. I just so happen to have all the evidence you need for that with one of the best books ever written, The War of Art. Break through the blocks and win your inner creative battles. I think there's 2 common schools of thought when it comes to, um, art and creativity. One school of thought is, I need to be inspired. I need to have a muse. I need to just feel like the art. Like I need to feel it. With respect, if you are in that category, we probably don't mix well with creativity. The category that I sit in, and um, unashamedly, I think this is more the correct way. And I know it's kind of rude to say there's a correct way to engage in art. And I'll also caveat, if you're struck by an idea or something, roll with it. I'm not against that. I'm against if you say you're an artist and your prerequisite is you have to be struck by inspiration. I don't I don't buy it. So the other side, which this book points out, is the thing that makes you an artist is you doing art, plain and simple. So a writer writes. A writer doesn't necessarily sell millions of copies. They write. A painter does not bless every art museum. They paint. It's the art itself and doing it that is the professional aspect. That is how you have made it. You've made it if you do it. You're professional if you do it. You are successful if you do it. The money, awareness, fame, and recognition are in no way related to whether you are an artist or creator. So, again, if you're struck by inspiration, fantastic. But for me, what makes me a writer is the fact that I write, plain and simple. So, um, what's the difference between wanting to be a writer and actually being one? It is that wanting to versus doing. So, whatever creative thing you're wanting to do, and you're like, oh, I just go quit talking and just go do it. And you've done it. And if you do that every single day, you are now professional at it. You're a professional if you do it well, and you show up as a professional. People look at you and say, that person does his craft with efficiency and diligence and intentionality. Does not matter if it's good. You're professional because you're doing it. And you're professional because you show up and you respect the craft. So I'm a staunch believer in that. I don't know if this counts as a second question, but it's in here. I want to start to become a writer. What and where should I start? Write. Write something every single day. And if you can't figure out what to write, stare at your paper or your screen every single day. Um, I know Neil Gaiman's under some hot water right now, and I understand why. He does have a good writing quote, something along the lines of, um, what is it? Something like, I don't need inspiration or I don't require inspiration to do my work, but somehow it strikes me every morning at 9 a.m. when I sit down at my computer. Like, it's just like it's the act of sitting down. I kind of hate to use him as an example because of everything going on with him, but look at people like Brandon Sanderson. They write because they have a schedule of writing. That's what they do. Even Stephen King, he has like I write. Was it Victor Hugo? It might have been Victor Hugo when he was writing one of his bigger books. I might be wrong, but he had like a servant in his home, and the servant was supposed to, I think, help keep the furnace going in his bedroom. And in the colder months, he would have his servant lock the door so the room would be freezing. Don't work on the fireplace. Don't cool my room or heat my room up. And the servant was not allowed to open the door to his bedroom. So the author could not leave the room until he submitted, I think, 4 pages of manuscript under the door for a servant to look and be like, yep, he wrote 4 pages. He's allowed out to use the bathroom, to eat, to have water, to have warmth. So um, you just write. And if you can't write, stare at a screen and stare at paper. Let the little flashing icon without words on your Word document just sit there. Let the paper sit empty. You just start. So, who are your favorite writers and what do you admire about their style? Jay Bonanza is not my favorite writer. I mentioned him a minute ago. I think he's got beautiful prose and is a good way to learn some new words. I just like those books and him as a writer, but I wouldn't just read anything that he writes. Like, um, my favorite author is probably Kurt Vonnegut. Uh, Pivotal piece there being Slaughterhouse-Five, which is still probably my favorite fictional book. Um, it's a real uh, hard position between the first and second place for me, which is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut and I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. Asimov's up there as one of my favorite authors. Um, I, Robot everyone should read it. It's a very short fiction book. It's nothing like the film, so try not to. We've seen a Will Smith movie. It's not a good representation of what you're getting into. Uh, Dallas Willard's up there. He's a theologian, philosopher, professor. Very well worded man. C.S. Lewis is up there too for similar philosophical reasons. He's high up there. Stephen Pressfield, this guy, for again very few works. I don't think you need to love everything an author writes for them to be one of your favorites. Just my belief on that. The War of Art is really good, and Turning Pro, his follow up to it, very good. He's written fiction and other stuff too, but uh, they're fantastic. What do I admire about their style? I'm just like skipping that. Kurt Vonnegut, his style is I loved it. I saw a map one time that mapped out storytelling. It's like the hero's journey. They're usually doing okay, and then something bad happens. Uh-oh, and life sucks, and then they have to learn, and they have a skill spike. They learn, and they get good at skill, and usually the climax of their story gets a little bit hard and dips a little bit and comes back up to a level that's above where they were because they've learned and grown. There's like a trajectory of life in those stories. Kurt Vonnegut typically writes through his belief of existence, which is that life is a series of, oh, this is good. Oh, this is hard. Oh, this is good. Oh, this is hard. Oh, this is good. Oh, this is hard. And then you'll just somewhere in there die. So maybe you die at a peak and people are like, oh, he died right after that performance or right after, he got to see his great grandchild born. That's beautiful. And other times I'm gonna be like, "Oh, he died right before those moments," and then it's a bummer, and the only difference is where he was at in relation to time. It's a cool concept, so, a lot of his books kind of feel plotless in some sense. A really good example of that is Timequake, which, um, just is about people being stuck in time. They go back in time in their own minds and bodies about 2 years or something like that, and then they just jump back in and line back up, but they're aware of what's happening the whole time. It's a very quick description. It's good. The Slaughterhouse-Five is fantastic with the way it's written, and it's written out of chronological order. Um, Isaac Asimov, just good science fiction and good clean science fiction. If you like a story that just focuses on the narrative and doesn't really fluff it up with anything gratuitous of any category, he's great. Um, I said Dallas Willard, his use of words, and same as C.S. Lewis, just making you think. And these are regardless of whether you agree with them and their philosophical stances. They're well thought out people, and they communicate thoughts really well, and I appreciate that. Um, Gosh, there's definitely more. Um, I don't want to spend too much time sitting here thinking about it. There's I could I have people in mind right now, but if I list them, they're now equal with a bunch of other people. So we're gonna leave it mostly there for now. Okay, let's see what else we got. What other categories? Just looking through different topics that I'm interested in here. This is what you get, I guess, with live stream. Some quietness. Politics. I don't know about that. Let's do. I got a topic. Hmm. Here we go. Which is better, Star Wars or Star Trek? Oh yeah, I've got an opinion on that. If you've met me, it's Star Wars. Why? It's just better to me. It's better. Um, I actually think the thing for me that keeps Star Wars up front, and this is different nowadays, but Star Wars has always been heavily a film series, and Star Trek is um, really successful television wise. And so I think some of the wackiness that has to come with yeah, Star Wars all the way, no debate. Yeah. I would also agree fact not opinion um in the comments. I do think the I don't care if you like Star Trek. I'm not that violent about this. But I think Star Trek has just a difference with a week to week episodic feel in the earlier days, and Star Wars with its technically episodic, I guess, because they're called episodes, very streamlined narrative story, which is different now. uh, Star Wars has become pretty oversaturated, and Star Trek is still putting out shows and stuff like that. But I don't hate Star Trek. I love Galaxy Quest. That's my favorite Star Trek movie. Um, and then the only other one I've seen is Star Trek Nemesis in theaters. So shout out to Tom Hardy, I believe in that one. So just not for me, and that's fine. But Star Wars all the way. Um, which Star Wars character is your favorite and why? John popped out earlier, and he would have. He's gonna be sad that he's missing these questions. But Bo's here, and he likes the Star Wars ones. That works. Which is my favorite? Um, it's probably a little generic, but Obi-Wan Kenobi is probably my favorite. My answer is not generic. So, as I understand him in Legends content, which is all the stuff that was kind of canon before Disney bought it and said nope, pre 2012 Star Wars, pre Disney Star Wars, Obi-Wan is one of the best, particularly because as I understood him in Legends material and his backstory and coming up, Baby Yoda, that's true. Little Baby Yoda is he's probably up there for fun watching for me. I do like him. Um, Obi-Wan is described as not particularly competent or advanced in any field. He doesn't stand out in his training, but he is hardworking and diligent. So what makes him unique to me is he's relatable and being not special. He's kind of just a guy, but he's a guy who understands that if I work hard at something, I can probably be good at it. So a lot of his, whether it's military approach or his face-to-face combat approach, or even how he approaches his wisdom, is thoughtful. He has to work through the problem. So there's nothing comes natural. He doesn't block an attack naturally. He doesn't come up with an idea naturally. He has studied and he's learned it. So his ability to connect and understand through training, he doesn't have to overly rely on instinct. And I think that's an interesting characterization for him is that he's had to work hard for where he is at, and that sets him aside. So he's had to put more effort in, but he worked to get to where he was from from a place of having to approach every conflict as a unique challenge, not a cocky "I got this because I'm good at this stuff." So that's why I love him. Kylo Ren for Bo. Do you think that's a good character? I think that's one of the better characters from the Disney era. That's a good Disney era character. So is Kanan Jarrus is up there, and Ezra, whatever. I almost said Ezra Koenig and Ezra Miller, and those are not the right people. Ezra and Kanan, I think, are fantastic. All the Rebels cast is fantastic to me. Brinu, and yes, Baby Yoda of Mandalorian. There's some good stuff. But okay. Um, I'll answer the comment question, then go back to Star Wars. So Melissa's asking, any fictional characters with story arcs that you related to in a therapeutic way? You asked kind of like a follow up. I'm going to answer it in two separate ways. So, from a therapeutic perspective, I think there's a lot of characters that are essentially just case studies at the end of the day. Cinema therapy on YouTube. That's like their whole shtick is just watching um, like mainstream movies and their therapists. At least one of them is, and just commenting on it. So it's right for that work. I think a lot of that is because our storytelling is very rooted in archetypal behaviors, and archetypes are good stories and they're deep personal experiences. So a good character, like good stories, are both like archetypal and relatable. So they fit story-driven narratives and life experience of people. So that blends. A lot of the classic Disney movies are like that. Any hero's journey story, like Star Wars, like Harry Potter, things like that. But the expounded part of that question, which I'm going to count as a second question for me, because I'm giving two different answers. Stories that resonated with me in a way that healed a deeper part of me with its resolution. And that one's interesting because it's not just connecting or being healing because who the character is, but with how the story is resolved. Um, I think the answer is yes. Let me see if I can find it. I do think the answer is yes. I might have to come back around though, because I have like that part of me that's like, yeah, man, this probably that healed part to be specific. Um, so I don't know. It is a really good question, and I want to give a deeper answer if I can. But there have definitely been characters who connect with me in a way that are inspiring and maybe not always healing, but I can look at them and think like, you know, they're in certain ways a model of what I want to be doing and who I want to be. So, um, yeah, I think being able to find ourselves in stories and in characters is really important because it's not always just a, "Oh, I see myself in them." To go back to the archetypal piece, it often is literally because you are that person from a um, like a process standpoint, from a archetypal standpoint. Like you are going through that journey, not the exact same way, but you are that in this moment. So um, that's why certain movies or books or stories resonate with us differently as we get older in different times. So and when we're in a different place in life, this resonates differently. So it's one of the reasons why that happens. All right, Bo. Best video game character of all time. That's a heated one too. That could be more heated than Star Trek versus Star Wars for some people. So, um, this is Spyro. Spyro is up there actually. That wouldn't have come to mind immediately, but I was talking to people about that on Tuesday, actually. How happy I was when that got remastered and moved to Xbox and replayed all of it again. Okay, maybe I'll start with a short list and narrow it down. So Master Chief is up there, and I'll allow. This is subjective to me because I didn't. I'm not going to play everything. I know some people would say like Mario and Zelda. Um, I haven't played a lot of them. I've played Super Mario Brothers on the NES, and then I played all the way through Super Mario Sunshine. And like, so he's not that important to me, but I know he's important. So Master Chief is up there for me for sure, and might just be the primary answer. Although, to go back to the archetypal storytelling piece, he's relatively uncomplicated. A lot of the characterization comes from other characters, but I do think that the connection that he has with Cortana in the series is very fascinating because she's an AI, technically not a living person with feelings, and he connects with her in a way that he represents almost a human form of her lack of humanity because he is through the novels and some game backstory we learn that he is more or less taken as a kid for experimentation and so severe experimentation that a lot of people in his class die from the test and he's an augmented human essentially and he's raised and his motherly figure is the doctor that worked on him and his AI model Cortana is actually based on her and looks like her and but the relationship is this almost romantic but not quite and it's a weird kind of how we talk about sometimes guys have a tendency to marry someone like their mom and women sometimes have a tendency to marry men similar to their dad or opposite characteristics so this dynamic plays out there. So I think especially in the original 3 games, he has a unique characterization for what his humanity looks like in relationship to actual people, but also in relationship to legitimate aliens in the story and this AI. So I think he's a fun, complicated character. Is he my favorite or best character of all time? I'm not going to get too dicey with that. I know some people are going to probably say it's Nintendo characters, but um, yeah, very good character. And Bo, you said Azrael or Doom Guy. Doom Guy's pretty high for me too. The only problem is he is not a character in some sense. Like there's no arc. He just kills. But that's the point. Like the arc is actually almost with the villains, and he's kind of the villain to the villains, um, which is fun. He's kind of like a Thanos or a John Wick character. Like the other people are afraid of him. He's not really overcoming any challenge, so that makes him fun. Not complex, but fun. um, I like Azrael too. Yeah, I remember remembering him properly. So, um, or replace Doom Guy with Master Chief. They're both good. Um, Apparently, the Amazon show Secret Level passed up an opportunity to do a Master Chief and Doom Guy crossover episode because Microsoft said no, and I might be a little bitter at that because that would have been fantastic, assuming they did it right. Moving on. What is the best order to watch the Star Wars movies? Uh, I have an opinion that I think is fact, and that's in the order that they're released. So, um, I'm a chronological order release person, not chronological timeline. So, order of release always for me. Um, Pretty much every case. But my primary reason for that is because if you watch the prequels first, the both Yoda and Darth Vader and the Emperor are all spoiled. So we know Anakin's storyline heading into the prequel series. If you don't watch that, there's this backstory you don't get. So when you watch episode 4, and Obi-Wan is at the beginning talking to Luke, he says, I knew your father. We fought together during the Clone Wars. He was killed by Darth Vader. If you've watched everything before, you already know what that means. But when you watch it the first time, what are the Clone Wars? They were clearly friends, and his friend was killed by this evil person, Darth Vader. But when you watch it in order, it's different because you're like, oh, you feel it differently. But I think it's more interesting to learn that as you go. And then Yoda's presented as this super wise master. And then when Luke finally meets him, it's just this kooky guy on a planet. And he's like, are you going to show me where Yoda is or not? He doesn't realize that's him. If you've watched the prequels, you see it. These are nitpicky things, I guess, but I think the story unfolds better when you watch it in the order it's released. So, did Disney wreck Star Wars? Is the next question. Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. A lot of people will say it was a mixed bag before, and it's a mixed bag now. But they've publicly come out and said that when they made Episode 7, they had no idea what the story for Episode 8 or 9 was. So, yeah, I think when you buy one of the most beloved series of all time and your approach is let's put out as much as we can without any direction, that's mishandling. So there's some really good stuff. uh, I like The Last Jedi. People hate it. Sorry, I like it. I love The Mandalorian. I loved Rebels. Like I said, um, I'm fine with the Ahsoka show. Tales of the Jedi are fantastic. So there's good stuff in there. Rogue One's amazing, but I think they and we'll never know what it would look like without them intervening, but it's been mishandled for sure. And the canon material is not as good. I love Legend stuff, but the new stuff is so like on a leash, making sure it doesn't like interfere with any of the 100,000 films or movies, TV shows they want to do. And the old stuff just kind of went wild, and I had fun with that. I was also younger, so that might affect perception a bit. So, um, yeah, who knows? All right. Why are some people hating Star Wars: The Last Jedi? That's what I said. I understand why. A lot of people think it mischaracterizes Luke Skywalker. Um, the throne room fight scene has awful choreography. I think it's cool and fun. It is bad choreography. Um, I actually think Luke Skywalker is just fine in his characterization. I know that's a hot take, but I don't think he's mischaracterized because I think there's been so much time that we haven't seen him for 30 years that you can't really know where he'd be state of mind. So it's fine. People don't like that though. Um, Carrie Fisher floating through space, people don't like. Everything on Canto Bight is not good. I don't like that part, so I get it. Um, why it's so hated, I don't know. It's definitely not as bad as the ninth one, but yeah. Though Star Wars purists who, when watching the movie, are trying to look for things to hate on it for. Yeah, there's a quote that I like that I've heard people say that no one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans, and that could not be closer to the truth. You'll never hear someone bash on the series more than people who love it. So yeah, I think you're spot on with your comment as well. Um, yeah, I gotta start moving it. I'm only a third the way through this. Okay, so I'm gonna shift to let's see. Is Dune just a cheap ripoff of Star Wars? Oh no, Star Wars is a ripoff of Dune. Um, Not really. It's heavily inspired though. So no, Dune is not a ripoff. Maybe I mean you could maybe argue the way that the film's being interpreted is taking a lot from Star Wars, like the new films, but Dune inspired Star Wars. So in part. Let's see. Is Star Wars overrated? No. Maybe nowadays a little bit. But you have to remember when 1977 when it came out, the year before, I believe, 1976, Logan's Run came out. And if you watch Logan's Run, some of the special effects are like a little tram ship on a stick thing going like just going across, and that's supposed to be the wide pan of the city and transportation happening. Uh, and I might be wrong with this, but as I understand, the Academy Awards created the award category for best special effects because of Logan's Run. Probably not because, but like that was the year where it's like we need special effects category because this is becoming a real thing. So I actually encourage you, if you think Star Wars is overrated, to go watch Logan's Run from 1976 and then immediately watch Star Wars: A New Hope. And the astronomical jump in special effects and cinematography is mind-blowing. So I think for people that are younger, myself included, we don't understand that in the context of the time. But I think the closest you can get to understanding it is watching those two movies back to back. Um, it's crazy. So I think it's crazier than what Avatar did in 2009. So um, I do think you could argue it's maybe overrated now, but it's one of those things that it starts so strong that it's just forever going to matter to people. And maybe that'll start to slip when people who grew up with it are dead. But even James Bond is like a crazy phenomenon, and that's pushing. We're getting close to the 100-year mark on that. So Star Wars just was so revolutionary that it just solidified its place. So um, yeah, is Call of Duty better than Star Wars? Well, they're different. There's been no Call of Duty movies, I don't think. There have been Star Wars games though, so that's subjective. I think Call of Duty is more predictable. You know what you're gonna get. Star Wars is like a coin toss. That's a surprisingly difficult question. Star Wars is probably better. It's more original. At the end of the day, Call of Duty is very derivative, but it works. Um, Bo, I'm sure you have an opinion on that. If you're still listening, but yeah, I'd say Star Wars is better overall, just because of originality and creativity. But Call of Duty is its own thing. All right, Battlefront is better than modern CODs. I liked Battlefront. I've liked all four of the mainline entries. Battlefront 2015 was okay. 2017 was really good. I even liked the ones on PSP back in the day that I would play on my portable PlayStation. And that was which one is that? I want to say Battlefront Squadrons, but I know like Squadrons is the fighter game. But that was a pretty good one. I enjoyed that a lot. So I'm gonna go back to see if I can get more topics going. Okay, so shifting topics. I'm also fine with topic recommendations from the chat. If you just have a topic, you don't really have a question, but you're like, talk about this stuff, I will do that. Or let me do music because I already talked about music, so that's not out of left field. So, yeah, what kind of music do you listen to? I'm gonna refrain from saying eclectic because that is the basic answer. I listen to a decent amount of worship because I play a lot of that music for sets, so it's obligatory to study it. I like it, but there's a lot of studying involved. But in my own private time, I haven't been listening to a lot of music lately. When I do, a lot of instrumental. When I work, I prefer Baroque music. I do like Beethoven and Bach when I'm working. Sometimes I listen to the Interstellar theme on repeat for hours when I'm working. I love it. Just the dun 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 bum 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 dun 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 dun. I can like hours literally. Uh, Half of that soundtrack I can just listen to on repeat. So that's a lot of what I listen to, but I got heavily introduced to music with rock and hard rock, metal, and stuff like that. So there's a soft spot in my place for a lot of the heavier, not like heavy. Some people think I'm talking about like August Burns Red or like Sleep Token kind of stuff, but um, I'm talking more like Rise Against and Metallica and Breaking Benjamin and Shine Down and Sick Puppies and um, just a lot of that. Some Nickelback in there too, but like actual Nickelback, not popular songs. That's gonna get me probably some crap too. But yeah, I liked a lot of that stuff. Skillet, Thousand Foot Crutch, Red, and just kind of whatever else was thrown in there. I would listen to a lot of rock. Rock shows were the thing. Bosa's Christian rap music for the win. I like a lot of NF. I know he maybe doesn't like the moniker of Christian rap, and I think that's fair. A lot of earlier Lecrae stuff, like the first 12 years of Lecrae, I really, really like in that genre as well. And then a couple kind of random ones in there, hit or miss. So um, I love the Doom Eternal soundtrack as well as instrumentals go. That's a pretty good one. A couple soundtracks actually are really good from games. um, Next question: is music good while studying? I think it can be. There's actually psychological answers to that. It can be not helpful, but if you find what fits and works, I think for a lot of people, not listening with lyrics is helpful because the words get mixed up. But I already said I listen to a lot of instrumental, so it's very helpful. A lot of stuff on here of what to listen to while texting. Hey, see you, Bo. Thanks for joining. Have fun at work, I hope. Let's see. There you go. A little heart thrown to you. Um, let's see. What's the best music to listen to while sleeping? That's a great question. I think again, whatever kind of gets you in that state of mind. So there's certain is it theta waves or delta waves? There's certain wavelengths that are helpful for sleep. There's certain songs. Weightlessness by Marconi Union, I think, is one that's supposed to relieve anxiety. So there's music theory that connects with brain science, which is designed to help you process out what you're feeling, or not quite that dramatic, but calm you. So there's calming music, and people will listen to ambience, which I think is really interesting. And um, it's also interesting to think ambient sound can kind of that metaphor, like it's music to my ears, it's relaxing. So how does music affect the brain? There you go. So I mentioned before, to elaborate on that more, this is question 40 for people keeping track. How music affects the brain. Read Musicophilia for real by Oliver Sacks. It heavily affects the brain. It can induce healing. It can support trauma induction as well. Interestingly, people talk about you should play classical music for your baby. There's actually certain classical music that will stress out their nervous system and be harmful. So it's not just classical music; it's the right kind of music. We're very affected by the brain. You can get a degree in music therapy. You get a PhD in it. It's very, very under talked about for how much research actually exists for. So it is a really, really useful tool. Um, and it can be very therapeutic, especially lyrics, man. People use music as therapy all the time. And you hear a lot of, and, like I said, I grew up in a lot of rock scene, and a lot of rock bands are actually very open about mental health stuff. And their music is talking about things like suicidality and um, drug use and abuse and things like that. So, especially from a lyric perspective, it's poetry with sound in a lot of ways, and the sound helps induce the feeling that supports the words and vice versa. So the way it can just pull a response from people, and even rhythm, even if you're deaf, you can often feel rhythm, depending on how the bass and the sound structure is set up, and just there's still an impact that can be present there. So, um, okay, I'm gonna take about a 60 to 120-second pause because I got to use the bathroom, and I will be back and dive into more. So feel free to ask a couple questions real quick. I might get another coffee and hold me accountable. I'm going to aim for 2 minutes. I'll be right back. We're back. And I know some of the noise traveled in, but that's fine. All right. Continuing on. Decent pace. Question 41 out of, I think, 102. Yep. So we'll keep going. So I'm going to go back to a couple more mental health ones and we'll have fun in that category. Oh, geez. We'll start with this one. Why not? How do you maintain your mental health while going through a divorce with children? Yeah. So I said before, I'm specially trained in play therapy, child therapy, with even more specialty in perinatal development and prenatal to age 5 kind of work. So the answer is that it is very hard, and perhaps you don't fully do that. The type of divorce matters, and your children matter. If it's an amicable divorce versus a abusive and violent one, and you're running, wildly different. If you have a newborn versus 5 kids ranging from age 5 to 17, so this is super contextual. One of the helpful metaphors for me that I offer, I think a lot of people have heard it, is when you're on an airplane and the masks come down, what do they tell you? Please put yours on first before helping someone else. If you can't breathe and you pass out and die, your kid will as well because they rely on you. So I'll start with that. Is you have to be functional enough to care for them. Now, I've seen some people say, well, it's better for my mental health for my kid to not be in soccer because I don't like having to go take him every week. Like, come on, we're pushing it at that point, right? So this is where I think one of the best things you can possibly do is get connected with people who love you and care about you. And anyone who's listening, find that now if you don't have it already. Because when disaster occurs in your life, and it will, everyone has it, your community and the people who love you are what will get you through that with safety and care. So um, get that now because you can't make it when you need it. It's built. So I shouldn't laugh. How can I cope when everything is triggering? Please don't say therapy. Uh, I want to know what was going on in this person's life so much. Please don't say therapy. For the sake of the video and time, I'm not going to read answers. I'm debating doing more of these videos where I answer these questions, respond to actual answers within the questions, and um, smaller, obviously not 102 every time. How can I cope when everything is triggering? There's a really big problem if everything is triggering. I'm assuming we're in a little creative writing space with how that's worded, but everything should not be triggered. Why do I say should? Because it does make sense for some things to be triggering, and we need to address them. Um, you need you need people that can help you identify, and I'm not going to say therapy because you said don't say therapy, but you do need people to support you. Doing this alone, um, when we are in a triggered state, in an emotionally heightened state, we do not think clearly. So um, it's important that we have people around that can kind of call us into where we need to be and can help us identify what's going on. So being around people is really helpful. There's a lot, I guess, that you could say, and there's a lot that I don't know. So I'm not going to try to expound too much on it, but um, the type of people are going to be a big help for you. So what's the difference between therapy that works and therapy that doesn't? Okay. I said before, a competent clinician. Uh, my actual deep belief is the client. The client is the difference. If you want it to work, it probably will. Um, I know a lot of people get into certain things and they say, I've tried everything, this isn't going to work. Uh, God, do I get that? I've had that with multiple things in my life. I understand that. But I really believe that you are the number one factor in whether therapy works. Um, a good therapist makes a huge difference in that. Um, think about it this way: you're the number one factor of whether or not you can learn to play the guitar. However, if you can dish out the money for the world's best guitar teacher, it's gonna be way easier and way quicker. Um, but at the end of the day, you are the one that decides that, whether you practice at home or not. When you show up to guitar practice, are you even respecting the teacher and giving them your time? Are you practicing with diligence? Are you coming prepared? You're the factor. You are the factor in that. But a good teacher helps. You're the factor in therapy. A good therapist helps too. So um, I'm gonna skip this one because it's just really deep, and that's gonna be a lot. Can you open a psychology clinic after a psychology degree? Yeah, this is something I work with a lot of. So I do a lot of business consultation and coaching and trainings, and um, a common question is like, what are the rules about me opening up a therapy practice as a therapist? There's you're starting a business. That's kind of the rule. So some guy off the street can open up a psychology clinic. He just can't practice. So that's just a business being run. You can open up a business and then hire the psychologist. And they're separate things and it's really easy to mix them, but I'm a therapist and a business owner and they overlap a lot, but they're technically completely separate things. So, um, yeah, you can open it now before you get your degree. You just can't practice. You can start hiring clinicians if you want, if you're doing employee. So make sure if this fits you as a question mark too in your life. Listening, they're categorically different. So you can open your business whenever. There's laws around how to do that and how you promote yourself, and anything that requires licensures for avoiding malpractice. You do need to be more careful with how you're running a business because you can't be flippantly doing that. But it is separate technically from the degree. What do psychologists think of their depressed clients? Subject well, I'm not a psychologist, we'll start with that. But therapists, it depends. If you My rule is that if I don't have hope for someone, I won't work with them. I have to really believe that they can get better. And if I don't believe that, my argument is that I'm practicing unethically and have no right to be helping them. If I look at them every time, I'm like, "Ah, what a waste. I'll just take their money." Not helpful. Even if I was doing it for free, let's just say that. And I'm like, they're not going to get there. I have to believe in them. So if I'm looking at my depressed clients and I'm just like, oh gosh, I don't think I can help that much. So I'm adamant, like I have to really believe in you. And I believe in most people. I've actually never terminated a case because I had no hope for them, um, for my client. Um, so I don't know. It depends. And I think if you're a psychologist listening, you need to have a hope for them to be seeing them. It's okay if your thoughts are like, "Oh wow, this sucks," or even empathetic and "Oh, I feel really bad." I don't think it's helpful to take pity on people. That's not what they're paying you for. But having some directional thoughts on encouragement are good. Do psychologists analyze their behavior? Most therapists I know analyze their behavior for sure. Some are blind. Some are like weird where they understand it a lot, but they're a little on like the psychotic spectrum and they use it to be manipulative. That's a small percentage of people. They're interesting to interact with. Um, but yeah, most of us have to pump the brakes and be like, don't overthink it. So yeah, we do. Yeah. To each their own, but we do. Can you lie to a psychologist? Yes, you can lie to anyone. It's just not usually helpful. But I think what the question's actually asking is, can you successfully lie to them? Yeah, yeah. It just are you a good liar or not, is the end of the day. Um, and I do think that psychologists and therapists are probably a little bit better at picking up on it for two reasons. One, we hear stories for a living. We get paid to listen to stories and offer input. And two, um, it's there's a longevity piece there. So when you start lying, this is just true of psychology and sociology. It's hard to maintain the lie. The more details you add, the harder that is to continue. So the longer your story goes on, actually, the harder it is then for you to continuously convince us. Um, and I guess unless you're just enjoying some sadistic behavior, like what a waste of money to go in and lie. It's got to be some pride thing or something else going on. So, um, Melissa asks, what do you recommend for individuals who have been hurt slash traumatized by the wrong therapist? It's very common for people to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use that analogy. Um, you shouldn't let one experience tell you that an entire category is bad. This is how we become, um, like racism has a lot of that. You'll hear people say that, or they had a bad interaction with a race and now they're racist. That's not good. You see that with people who don't like one person in the LGBTQ community and they're all bad. They're all trying to do this. They're like, we get into this like they're all like because your frame of reference is that, and psychologically it makes sense. If I get bit by a dog the first time I ever see a dog, I'm going to be scared of dogs more than likely. Um, and it might take me being around 20 more dogs to really internalize like they don't all bite me. They're not all mean. That one bit me. And then it becomes less dogs are evil and more that dog hurt me. So I think that's a place that's important to start is if you're coming out of a hurt experience with a therapist, specifically like a therapy experience. So not just a therapist, but you've gone to therapy and that was an experience that left you hurt and traumatized. To ask yourself, is my perception a all therapists are this way or a that therapist was? And if it's an all therapist, you need to start with doing work on understanding that it might not be all. And maybe it is all of them. Maybe you do believe it is. And So I don't think you can just immediately throw that out because, um, for instance, I think all murderers are not great people. I encounter one, and I can comfortably assume that from all of them, that I'd rather not be around people trying to kill me. Okay. So there are scenarios where we can overgeneralize, but I think it's good to start with, is this all of them? So if you're hurt, traumatized, talk to other people that you know who have gone to therapy, ask what their experience was. Is this normal? They should hopefully tell you, no, that wasn't normal. And then you're going to have to work through some healing. And the ironic part, the part that sucks, is where do you go to do that? You're supposed to go to therapy and you got hurt last time. So you're going to have to deal with that in the context and the space of something that represents harm. So I did a lot of work in domestic violence when I was just starting out in training. And a lot of people coming in have been hurt by men. 100% of my clients, none of them were men. I had a couple boys, kids, never sat with a male over the age of 18, all children and women. So it's not 100% of cases of domestic violence are men. There's definitely women that um, engage in domestic violence. Um, but being honest, there it's more often men, at least in terms of the damage being done and people coming in. There's also an issue with men reaching out for help in those cases. So there's a bit of a bias there where there's men that need that attention that don't come in. But all my work was working with women. Some women did not want to work with me because as a man, I was an archetypal representation of something that created pain. They logically knew it wasn't me, but maybe they thought all men were that way now, which we know isn't true. And or they thought I can't work with him. And then other women worked with me for the sole reason that I was a man, and they wanted to heal uh, heal with someone who looked like the pain inducer. So it is hard to do that route, to look at someone and be like, someone that looks like you, the representation of you has hurt me, and I want to reconcile that. It's difficult to do. So, that person healing from therapy trauma will have to do that in therapy, and that sucks. But again, I will harp on this a lot. Have a good community of people win in if you can. And if your friends and your family all kind of suck, please try to start building a network of people that you know care about you and are able to attend to you in a healthy way, not overbearing on either direction. Because these are the people that you'll need to rely on in these moments. And to go back to a question from earlier, maybe asking these friends or family to come with you to therapy and getting a therapist that's okay with that. We can have that consultation, like, I was hurt by a therapist and I want my friend to be able to come because I I don't necessarily distrust you, but I had this awful thing happen and I'm uncomfortable. And in my place, I would, if that client makes sense to work with, I'd be like, yeah, bring in. You're essentially bringing your safety net in with you. So thank you for the good, deep, and tiring question. It is a good one because it happens too, and people should talk about it. And there are pages like that on Quora, like therapists exposed and bad therapist stuff. This stuff can divulge into just uh, unfiltered aggression and um, chaos, but it's still good to find spaces. So, how do mental health professionals maintain boundaries while still showing genuine care? I love that question. Um, when you're setting a boundary, a good question to ask yourself is, why am I putting the boundary up and who's it for? So we can understand where it's coming from. Am I making this out of fear or am I doing this out of love? And I think it's safe to categorize into those two extremes. Is this a fear-based decision or a love-based decision? Am I putting this boundary up because I'm afraid to lose a client, because I'm afraid to lose income, because I'm afraid to lose prestige? Or am I putting this boundary up because I love myself and I love my client, and I know that without this boundary, this creates avenues for pain to slip through the cracks and hurt our relationship? The question is about mental health professionals, but better question for me is, How do humans maintain boundaries while still showing genuine care? Relationship and love. Because we can explain our mistakes and our decisions if we come from a place of love and respect. This is actually why, for me, some of the hardest moments are when I lose clients over misunderstandings in the first like 2 or 3 weeks, because there's no relationship built yet, and they don't know me enough, and I've had it happen a couple times, like a cancellation policy or a miscommunication happen, and they get mad at me, and what am I gonna do? Like, we don't know each other. They don't. So me connecting relationally is almost a burden to them. Because I'm like, well, we can talk. Let's chat. And they're like, I don't want to spend more time with you. You've hurt me. So sometimes it's not fully avoidable, but relationship building and love focused responses are going to be. I mean, they're going to move mountains in terms of getting you closer to that destination. So I don't follow this, but I got pushed. Email etiquettes is a space. What's the most polite way to express desires in business emails? Um, I hope this email finds you well. Sorry, I'm not really gonna answer this question. That's a um, most polite way to express desire. Run it through Chat GPT. Say, please rewrite this email in a way that expresses my desire. There you go. I'm joking, but that actually would work really well. How do you make a request politely in an email? Okay, but all seriousness for this, the Gottmans, the researchers have a really one of the coolest statistics in the history of mankind is for a relationship to function well and for both parties to feel like the other party has their best interest in mind. There needs to be 20 positive interactions for every one negative interaction. Positive interaction can be an actual direct say, like, I love you, thank you, how are you doing? But it also can be doing this. For those listening, I just nodded my head and smiled. That's me saying, I'm listening to you. I see you. It can be saying, mm-hmm, or going like, oh, like it's connecting. It doesn't have to be a dramatic interaction for every one negative one. For relationships to still feel like people care about each other during conflict, 5 positive interactions for every one. So for every one negative thing that happens, there needs to be 5 positive during conflict. And if you can do that rule, you're gonna have pretty good relationships. Why is that relevant to how do you make a request politely in an email? Use that because you can argue that the request, for instance, I'd like to change my appointment time. You can make an argument that's negative, neutral to negative, because what you're kind of saying is, I would like to inconvenience you potentially. Now, the recipient might be like, oh, thank God I wanted that appointment moved. But if their schedule's locked, they want it, and it is inconvenient to move it, you are now inconveniencing them. Doesn't mean they're mad, but it's an inconvenience. So that's saying, I'd like to move my schedule. So if you just email and say, hey, or you don't even say, hey, you just say, I want to move my appointment from 3 to 5. That's just a negative interaction, neutral and negative. How to present that in a softer way and make it more likely that that person will say yes is, hey, so and so, positive, hello. I was hoping I might be able to move my appointment from 3 to 5 p.m. today. That's the neutral negative. I understand you're busy and I really don't want to inconvenience you. It's positive because you're acknowledging their position, how this might impact them. I'm really looking forward to the appointment either way. I look forward to see you. I hope you're having a great week. Hope you're having a great week. Thanks, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Positive, positive, negative, positive, 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 positive. And that's just going to land a little bit different. And that was very off the cuff. You can refine that more, but that's a really, really good way to get those interaction. Um, yeah. What's the psychology behind why people get upset about others' barefoot choices that don't affect them? I don't know if that's literally asking about people walking around in bare feet or not, but I wanna pretend it is because that's what it sounds like. I don't know. It's gross to some people. Some people get weirdly turned off by feet, and other people get weirdly turned on by it. I don't know. Feet are a very weird, um, psychological thing, like, legitimately weird. I don't understand it. I forget the data, but there's a surprisingly large amount of people that, have foot fetishes, just to be direct. Um, and a lot of people that are disgusted. Doesn't matter if you have pristine feet and you're a foot model, they're disgusted when your feet are out. So I think for a lot of people, it's just gross. So, yeah, that's a really deep question that'll be too time consuming. What does it mean when Google's first answer is Quora? Uh, that means the world doesn't know, but somebody's curious about it. So that's probably what that means. And good news. That was question 51, meaning we're halfway through. You know what I need to do to encourage myself here? Gosh, talking a lot. Okay. I'm going to do a rapid fire round. I'm going to find a list of a few questions that are yes or no, and I'm not going to expand on them at all. I'm just going to say yes or no, which you might hear that and be like, oh, I'd be interested though to hear more detail. But I can guarantee you, I'm going to be more bothered by this than you are because every part of my soul wants to expand on the question. So I'm going to do a couple of these, maybe between 10 and 20. All right, here we go. Are you a morning person? No. Um, do you like risky adventures? Yes. Do you like to be around people? Yeah. Are you the life of the party? Nope. Do you like to play chess? Yes. Is fashion important to you? No. Do you enjoy your own company? Yes. Do you like to read? Yes. Are you interested in sports? No. Do you like to learn new things? Yes. Do you like to sing? Yes. Are you shy? No. Have you ever told a lie? Yeah. I, have you ever told a lie? I'm skipping that one. There's not a person on the planet that can answer no to that. Do you have any hobbies? Yes. Could you speak in front of a crowd? Yes. Do you like a good debate? Yes. Do you avoid conflict at all costs? No. Are you humble? I mean, the answer proves the reality to the other people. This is like a how do you I gotta skip that. If I say yes, I'm humble, then I'm not humble. If I say no, I'm not humble, then that implies that I can never be. That's what I'm talking about. See, what do you do with a question like that? Am I humble? Have you ever seen the movie Pop Star Never Stop Stopping? Never Stop Stopping? I haven't seen all of it, but I love there's an opening scene that I watched online. It's phenomenal with Mariah Carey, and it's talking about the the um the aforementioned pop star in the film has a song called Humble, and it's just about how humble he is. The irony there being is that he's talking about his own humility. And um he there's a quote with Mariah Carey, and she's like, and it's just satirical. It's like, I love the song Humble. Um, it really resonates with me because I'm the most humble person I know. Um, and I just really like that joke a lot. It's right on the nose and it's good. Does skydiving sound like fun? No. Do you like scary movies? Mm, yeah. Do you think you know more than most people? No. Mm. No. I had to tally all those up. That was harder than any question I've answered so far. That was 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. There we go. Hope you guys don't mind me doing it that way to speed things up a little bit, but that was actually fun because it was all over the board topically. So, and look at that, and just like magic, we're on question 71. That's all it takes. I could have just done this list has over 102. I could have done this video in 2 minutes. I can fall back on this if I'm about ready to pass out. So while I was doing that, uh, Melissa asks, "Have you heard of Splunka therapy, and would you recommend it?" Have I heard of it? No. Therefore, I would not recommend it. That doesn't mean it's not good though. Let's take a look. Splunka. For those just listening. Oh, wait, did I pronounce right? Oh, Splonkna? There's an extra letter in there. So it's actually in the chat it's spelled. There's actually one extra letter in there than in the chat. Splankna. SPL. No, geez. Splankna. What is this? Is it religious? There's like religious articles. Where'd you get this from? I've never heard of this. I can't do a whole deep dive right now. Just tell me what it is. What is it? Uh, what is it? Energy psychology. Why about pages are so complicated nowadays. Splankna work brings together the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of an issue all at once. This whole person approach can often facilitate change at a deeper level than more traditional methods. When body, soul, and spirit work together, the potential for change is maximized. Splankna harnesses remarkable mechanisms created by God in the mind body connection. We provide a highly effective procedure. Okay, so it is religious. It no, I don't know about it. So therefore, I don't recommend things I don't understand. So that doesn't mean it's not useful. The description is actually somewhat in the realm of more mind body somatic type work, which can be really, really helpful. Somatic experiential therapy is another good one. I do understand more of that. Um, I do actually think if you are a spiritual or religious person, there's a lot of value in pursuing healing approaches through that belief system. As I said before, one of the determining factors of if therapy will work is if you think it will work and you put the effort in. Part of that is if you believe it. That's why an atheist going to Christian counseling, very low chance that they're going to benefit from that. A Christian going, very high chance, same counseling, same counselor. Why? Initial belief and buy into the ideology and understanding of how humans work and the spiritual side. So, um, yeah, this is one of those things where it might be perhaps a spiritual form of somatic work, I'm guessing. So no, I don't know where that I love hearing new ones. This is what I said earlier. There's like hundreds of theories and approaches, and you learn about them every day. So nope, I haven't heard much about that one. Um, okay, how do I watch CNN headline news on Google? I don't know. And this question has zero answers on Quora, so no one knows how to watch CNN headline news on Google. My guess is that you type it into Google and then you click the CNN link. Um, I would do that. So, uh, What are your thoughts on Ben Affleck's comments about his time playing Batman in the DCEU? Wow, look at that. Also, no answers. I don't know what his comments are, and this question doesn't elaborate. If you want to see a super funny interview, though, there's one of Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill, who plays Batman and Superman, respectively, in the DCEU, the Detective Comics Expanded Universe film series. And it's the interviewer asking them about the reception to Batman versus Superman, which, uh, as a critical score, received like a 36% Rotten Tomatoes, very divisive to the fan base. 2.5 hour film. I actually maintain if you watch the extended edition, which is, I know people are like, well, it should be fine the way it is. I think it was fine the way it is. And I think DC told them to make it shorter because they like to step in and say, good job, we're going to change it. They do that, I think, a lot. So um, I'm not a Zack Snyder apologist, but his 3 hour cut of that film is wonderful. And I had two friends of mine who didn't see that movie because of the bad reviews it got. I saw it in theaters, and then I was like, it's fine. Then I got the 3 hour version when it came out on Blu-ray, and fantastic because it adds plot. They cut plot. Um, and I had these two friends over, and I said, "Just it's good. Just watch it." And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "It's 3 hours," and they're like, "I don't want to just watch the movie." Trust me, I was more of the cinephile in the group, so there was a little bit of built-in trust. Ryan's hopefully not going to give us crap, and they both were like, "That was good," and I'm like, "Right, that's the the extended cut. That is, it's his version. I know that's this Snyder cut weighted languaging there, but it's good." So, um, I think the people who worked on it might have known it was good, and then it was cut up. Um, and that sucks if you work on something. And I get that that's how a lot of production works. Is people who are funding the marketing and the production of it. Yeah, they want some say in it. I get it, but where's the line between trusting your artist to create art that you're essentially commissioning, as far as I'm concerned? So, um, yeah, man, it's like just a bummer. So it's a really good movie, but the interview, to circle back around, um, is the two of them, Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck, being asked about it, the bad reviews, and Henry Cavill's giving this like elaborate answer, kind of spin it a little bit in a productive way, and Ben Affleck's just sitting there like this, like zoning out, like you just wondering if he's got like Daredevil going through his mind again, um, and and then it comes back around. The interviewer looks at him. She's like, "What do you think?" He's like, "I feel the same." It's really funny, and there's a cut of it, like the like zoom in on him, like just dramatic cinematography on it. But I mean, it's kind of sad because you can tell he's like he tried, um, but it's funny. But no, I thought I don't know his comments, but I thought he was fine in the role, and I maintain that his movie, the extended edition, is good, and then the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League is good, and I think overall the movies he was in were good. Um, and the Flash wasn't. I enjoyed the Flash for what it was, and he's in that for a little bit. I don't think it's a great movie, but I like that it kind of went off the deep end a little bit, and I had fun with that part, which not everyone did. And yes, I agree the CGI was wonky, but yeah. Who are you most excited to see in James Gunn's Superman? I'm neutral on the movie, all things considered. Um, I'm not. I'll probably for sure see it. I don't know if I'll see it in theaters. That'll depend on the reviews. But I'm neutral. I'm kind of just not really holding my breath. Maybe neutral to cautiously optimistic. I'm interested in Green Lantern only because I'm interested in the Lanterns TV show that they're working on, which is allegedly True Detective vibes, and it's got Kyle Chandler and who's the other person? Doesn't have Guy Gardner, I don't think, though, Nathan Fillion's character. So I don't know if I should be interested in Green Lantern or not because I don't know if he's going to be in it in that Green Lantern movie or show. Um, but I'm interested in him. I'm interested in Isabella Merced's Hawk Girl. I think she's a interesting actress, and she changed her name recently, uh, so her acting credits are different, and I think that's often and it wasn't like she got married or anything like sometimes happens, like, she just changed her name, which is a bold thing to do with acting, especially when she's on the up and coming route, which I know I guess earlier is better than when you're established, but so, um, she was in the Dora Explorer movie and the Alien Romulus film, but I'd be interested to see her portrayal. Um, I'm not that interested in the main cast, Superman, Lois Lane, and I don't care that much. I don't not care. I just they're not the ones that interest me in the movie, ironically. Um, so okay, back to the comments. If you had to incorporate an animal into your therapeutic care, what animal would you get? I mean, I think a dog makes the most sense, but a cat makes a lot of sense. Um, I think if we're going all in though, probably like equine therapy using horses. I think that's probably like yeah, it's I mean, there's evidence-based work on that, uh, but for just personal preference, I do think, if you had a really, like, well-behaved and loving cat, yeah, I lean towards that, but you can't force that. It's like a therapy trained cat, I think would be I don't know, would be my preferred one just off the cuff. So, um, John's back. So John, you stepped out, and I really hate to say this, but right when you stepped out, within about 5 minutes, I did a slew of Star Wars questions. Um, so I apologize. You'll have to go back and watch that part. Um, there was a bunch. I know. You can ask them too. You can bring. I even actually mentioned you during that moment. I was sad that you were gone, so you were missed. But I'll take more. We can throw it back in. Um, your question though: if you picked up a lightsaber crystal, what color do you think it would become and why? I mean, my first answer is it probably wouldn't be the color I think because it seems like the Star Wars crystals understand you better than you understand yourself. So I'm guessing there'd be something in there. I don't know. I actually need to go back and look at like what the technical meanings of the colors mean, like the legends ones. Um, like my gut response says like gray or orange, and I could not tell you why. Like I feel like that's what mine would come. I feel like gray makes more sense in some sense because I'm pretty like staunch and strong in my beliefs, but I feel like I do change them when it makes sense. And I feel like I can see both sides of a topic pretty well. So while I don't think I'm a gray person, I think the ability to see between the colors, so to speak, is maybe a stronger suit of mine. So gray makes sense. And yeah, I would say gray. You can answer that too. You can type yours. I would assume that you're gonna say blue. However, your profile picture isn't blue, and I'm wondering if I'm shooting myself in the foot saying that. But anyway, that's my probably my color choice there. Oh, I got to keep track of when I go back through and watch these. I think it's almost 100% guaranteed that the number of questions I thought I answered is going to be wrong. So keep forgetting. Blue is correct. Yes. Okay. I thought so. All right. Um, oh, I was too excited getting that right. You give off blue. It's a good color. Okay. Um, what else we got here? This is good. Do you phone your friends when you are depressed or tend not to call lest you push them away? Um, I tend to not call my friends actually, believe it or not. It's not because I'm afraid of pushing them away. Um, I feel very blessed to say that I think I could call no less than 20 or 25 people who would sit with me on the phone. Um, and I wouldn't be afraid that I'd be hurting the relationship. Some of them I wouldn't feel that way if this was a regular basis, but like in a pinch, I know. Like I'm comfortable that they would listen. Mm. Not the same as people coming in a bind to help me, but I would listen. So I'm not afraid of pushing people away. But I have a tendency to internalize depression and over intellectualize it. So, um, I have just a couple people I'm really close to that I go to with those, and even thinking about the question, I probably do need to add a couple people um, to that. So, it is a good question. We're just looking categorically now. Yeah. How do you turn your professional expertise into engaging online content? That's funny because that's what I'm kind of doing. Um, I think in some sense you can't. I think the thing that makes it engaging is the person. So me doing this, in a lot of ways, I've said this multiple times, I'm here to assist myself and enrich myself. I want other people to gain from it, but I'm not asking myself, what's the question phrase? I'm not asking myself, how do I make engaging online content? And maybe I should be asking that question. I'm doing this mostly for me, and maybe if I up production value, it'll help. But the way that I view it is, if you have something to offer, people will respond to that. And I know some people think like, oh, like they got like millions of subscribers and thousands listening. But the way that I view it, I mean, um, at the time of this recording, my videos on average get like 20, 25 views maybe. Um, and when I think about if I were just to walk into a room of 25 people and just be like, this is what's on my mind today, uh, and they would just listen to me, that's kind of crazy to think about. That I'm just talking about what's on my mind, and 25 people would be interested. So, when you think about me doing this to celebrate 100 subscribers, and it seems like you know, even I've kind of played it off like, who cares? But it's not. I shouldn't do that because it's 100 people, and yes, some of them are friends and family, but they don't have to. And even some of those friends and family that I've even wondered at times, like it's kind of a courtesy subscribe, right? They've actually brought up videos and be like, hey, I watched this one today. I'm like, oh, cool, thank you. Um, yeah, it's just so much easier to do this when you keep in mind like what a room full of people is. It's not a million views. That's absolute insanity. Good for those people. But I have a video that's got almost 300 views. I've I've never spoken to a room of 300 people. Oh, is that true? I've never been like a guest speaker teaching. I think I've talked to space that big, but I've never been like, we're here for Ryan that size. Um, so that's crazy. And so I'm super fine with that. And some people say, how do you turn your professional expertise into engaging online content? I think you just put it out there. If you have something to offer, especially if it's free and like you just learn stuff and you've accumulated it, just put it out there and offer it. Um, that's all it is. Just talk. And I think you can refine it. Like I want to get a better microphone and a better camera. Um, I do need to work on improving how I engage productively with the camera. Um, maybe eventually doing some editing to help keep people engaged and make it easier for people to listen to me who want to. Maybe people are like, I'm interested, but this is boring. Or I know I'm competing with like TikTok style stuff on Reels and there's millions of videos. Why would you watch mine? So, not to do it in a competitive way, but like, yeah, out of respect for people listening, make it more engaging. So, yeah, I would just say do it. Just put it out there and try to be engaging. How is professional competence an ethical issue? Ooh, I love it. Professional competence, well, it is an ethical issue. We'll start there. Um, yeah, if you say I can do a job and you can't, you lied, and that's unethical. So, um, gosh, I think a lot of guys struggle with this too, because a lot of men have a desire to prove they're capable, and the temptation, and it's not exclusively men. I just see it here. The temptation there is to say you're more capable than you are, and this is very risky to do in therapy about specialties and um, working within your scope of practice. Yeah, if you're not competent in your domain and you're acting as though you are, particularly through the action of work or advice, it's unethical because it steers people the wrong way. I mean, think about the news. Um, People just lie, or they misconstrue data, or they don't do their research, and like people trust you to tell them what's happening, and you're giving wrong information. It's crazy. Um, or people who are making products and they know something's off and they just don't do it, or they don't know how to do it. I've seen this a couple times with people doing home renovations on their own, and they're doing things that normally require you to understand codes, and they're doing it themselves, and they don't follow a code. Like, you can actually kill someone doing that. But they're like, "Hey, it's a home project." Yeah, and, you can learn how to do that, but I could also learn how to become a surgeon, but I'm not allowed to just do that from my living room. I can learn how to fix the trash can hinge when I hit the foot on it and the top doesn't open. That's fine. I can learn how to do that. Now, I'm potentially being unethical if I say I know how and I don't. Um, or at the very least, if I say I know how and then I don't even learn, I just make it worse. You think of like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's kind of like the epitome of I can do this and I can't. So yeah, it's an ethical issue for sure. Oh, look at that follow up question. How important is it in journalism for the journalist to be accountable? Uh, Imperative, yeah. Isn't that kind of the point? I don't know what it looks like to hold people accountable. Um, if you're in journalism, I do think journalists have room to. They don't have permission to lie, but they should have permission to not know the truth. So, like reporting with the best that we have. This is the best information we have. This is all I could find. Um, Consult other sources, stuff like that. Lying, intentionally lying. Is it extreme to say you should be fired for that in journalism? Um, but it's not a lie to acknowledge not knowing the truth. So I think there should be a lot of accountability in journalism, but this is really just true of character development and just life in general. You should hold yourself accountable. And it's good to hold other people accountable, especially in your own, again, back to community and friend groups. Hold friends accountable and hold family accountable, especially when they trust you and can hear you if you say, hey, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. So, yeah, don't understand that question. Is it normal for a masseuse to sit on you? Went for my first massage whilst traveling and was a bit shocked at how physical things were. Just turned 18. Oh, okay. So hopefully you were 18. Sit on you. I've had two massages professionally in my life, neither of which I was sat on, nor have I heard reports of this. This is the first I'm hearing. This might be an example of out of scope of practice. I will not speak to the practice of a masseuse. I don't know what they're supposed to do, technically. I mean, other than massage you. I'm going to go out on a limb. Uh, I'd say probably not, but there might be a type of massage that I don't understand. Also, if you've ever had someone like sit on your back and it like pops and you're like, oh, that feels good. I don't know. This is where it's important to ask questions and maybe bring someone with you if you're doing physically intimate things with someone in private. That's technically professional. So, yeah, you hope. Uh, is self development beyond academics? Ooh, yeah, I would say it's almost exclusively outside of academics. Self development can be learning. This is question 82 for people tracking. Is self development beyond academics? Yeah, I do think it's almost exclusively outside of academics. I think if you're trying to work on yourself, academics is probably not the route. Um, I think there's a line where, like, as you learn, we have to hit pause and integrate, or we're not learning. Um, there's a uh, this is a bit terse, maybe is the right word, uh, terse language, but I like this quote um, of mental masturbation, where people just Ooh, I'm just gonna engage in I'm learning. I'm gonna read Atomic Habits, and I'm gonna read this, like, 12 Rules for Life, and I'm gonna read, The Subtle Art of Not Giving Enough, and I'm just gonna read all this self-help stuff. Um, and that's all you do. I think it's actually more useful to, you develop when you learn and integrate. So the moment you learn something new and you're like, "Oh, that could be useful," hit pause and integrate, and you use the thing that you said could be useful. So, that can very much happen in an academic space, but I think it typically doesn't need to at all because it's pointless to learn if you don't integrate. Um, it doesn't matter how much I study therapy until I sit with a client. I'm not. I'm not doing therapy. Um, oh yeah, 82 already, John. Well, I think John, you missed it. Right when I hit 51 questions, I'm like, I'm almost 2.5 hours in. I'm at 51. This is too much. So I went online and found a list of questions, and I answered 20 of them and forced myself to only answer with yes or no. And it was very difficult, but that took like 5 minutes. So I steamrolled 20, and it was very hard for me. I was very uncomfortable. So yeah, I was speed running it a little bit. Okay, but your question: which member of the Fellowship of the Ring is your favorite and why? My childhood self just absolutely loved Legolas from no other reason, but I thought he was cool. Um, I was introduced to the series through the movies, um, and I played who made them? The surprisingly good, like, 2 games that came out, the video games that just slapped more than they had any right to, that were they were movie tie-ins too, which is usually not indicative of a good game. Crazy. But Legolas, especially him surfing down the stairs at Helm's Deep and shooting and then launching the shield, like, I'm just like, "That's that dude." Um and they were coming out, and I was old enough to understand who actors are actors, and so he was also in Pirates of the Caribbean, which I loved at the time, Orlando Bloom. So Legolas I thought was coolest, but as I've gotten older, um, I think the oh gosh, it's probably a tie between Aragorn and Sam. I think I look up to Aragorn more, but I think the better character, which is oh, you just said which is my favorite. It is probably Aragorn then, just because I think he's a very good example of just a man in so many ways. Um, but what about Treebeard and the Ghost? He's not part of the Fellowship. He's separate. He's assisting of the Fellowship, but he's very good too. Uh, C.S. Lewis actually has a very good and say he wrote on Treebeard. You should look that up. Anyone who's listening, C.S. Lewis goes into depth about the importance of words and the meaning of words, and that the reason why Treebeard is so it's comical that he takes some hours to decide or just to say hello to each other. But C.S. Lewis argues that when you say a word, the word is not just the word; it carries the weight of its entire history with it. And so these ints that live for so long, they've seen the evolution of their words, and their and communication means so much. So there's a lot of clarity in making sure we understand what each word that is said is, and it's a fun concept. He's got a decently long essay on well, you should read his reviews of The Lord of the Rings and his letters to Tolkien when they were coming out. They're fun to read, but he spends a lot of time talking about the importance of words with Treebeard. So yeah, good character. But I think Sam is a more interesting character because Aragorn is more fulfilled, but Sam has a good character arc of Shire to back to Shire and his role as technically not important. He's not the ring bearer, but he's this through and through companion. And it's a very honorable, and he's not extremely capable. His heart just takes him all the way. Like he could not have done it without help. Like he could not have probably gotten the ring there. He probably would have on his own succumbed to cowardice. But the importance of my friend needs me is a higher value than my cowardice. And he doesn't think about it. He thinks about my friend needs me, and almost not even the mission. It's like my friend who I love, and I made a commitment to Gandalf to get him here. I will fulfill that. And the only point in the story that he stops is when the person that he's committed to, Frodo, tells him to go home. And then he stops, and then he learns that there was deception when he comes across. Yeah, he comes across the uh, like the lambus bread that Gollum threw, and he realizes with confirmation that his friend was manipulated and there's a lack of safety. He immediately flips and goes back up the treacherous climb. I mean, he's all in from there. Um, so it's this like it's a really good character for bravery too, because he has no reason to be brave. He's not a warrior. He's not a fighter. So I think he's a better character overall, better character arc overall, um, and comes out of it like relatively unfazed. Like Frodo is not the same when he gets back, but like I feel like Sam is very just locked into like I'm just doing this because it's the right thing to do, and I made this promise to my friend. Um, just a cool character. So yeah, um, yeah, Aragorn and masculinity. I agree, John. So um, yeah, we could just do Lord of the Rings quotes the rest of the time, or just do Lord of the Rings questions. That was good. I'd be down. Although this would then get to quite a few hours long. What question am I on? What did you say? 82 already. You asked yours 83. I kind of answered many questions within that. Um, Art of Manliness podcast about hobbits. That would be interesting. There's so much to Tolkien's writing that you can expand on. I love that kind of stuff, man. So yeah, it's good. I actually need to read the book still. I'll make an attempt again this year. But okay. Yeah, you know what? Let's do a slight pivot for the next couple of questions and do Lord of the Rings. Let's find that. Which is better, The Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter? Lord of the Rings. Yeah. It's I thought about that for too long with how confident I was. It's Lord of the Rings. Um Harry Potter is unique because it has not been expanded on very much. I mean, J.K. Rowling tweets new lore like every so often, but um Lord of the Rings is better. I think the expanded books from the Lord of the Rings prove in some sense its betterness because the world is so thought out and that you can expand on the lore and nothing contradicts. I think a lot of the stuff that J.K. Rowling has tried to expand on with Harry Potter just doesn't really. You read it and you're like, why? And it's kind of clear. I'm guessing, but it feels really clear that she thought of it after. Whereas everything that's come after Lord of the Rings, we had The Hobbit, but then Lord of the Rings, then all of the appendices, I guess, in there too. But all the expanded writings that came from it, or have been extrapolated by Christopher Tolkien, is a sign that like he really built the world before going in, and he knows it. And I had a friend of mine recently explained to me that the reason Tolkien never wrote a follow up to the Lord of the Rings is he said he started it many times. Um, oh, I wish I remember the quote, but he essentially stopped because something along the lines of like the fallibility of man would not allow the world to stay pure or good for long enough to be happy with a sequel. Like it was going to fall to destruction again because that's what men do. And I think about actual history with that comment that who is it? Marcus Aurelius, known as the last of the great emperors, and how he was considered one of the greatest emperors of all time and was at the time um, most powerful man in the world, and how his son just destroyed everything after. And it's like you're one generation removed. And there's reason to believe that Marcus Aurelius was probably not a good father, but and you could say that that started with his fathering. Regardless, though, just you can build something amazing. And as kids, we understand this growing up. You build a perfect tower of blocks, and your sibling knocks it over. It took you 10 minutes to build that, and they kicked it, and you cry. we can destroy quite easily. So it's just interesting that that's supposedly the reason why Tolkien never did a follow-up, because it would just it negatively impacts the triumphant end of the original. So, um, you'd put Lord of the Rings above Star Wars, and that's saying a lot. That is saying a lot for you, especially. I'm trying to think if I had to pick between Lord of the Rings and Star Wars for the rest of my life, it probably would actually be Lord of the Rings. I think I like Star Wars more, but Lord of the Rings is more consistently on point. I'm completely ignoring Rings of Power in this because it's kinda not I mean, it's not great show, but it's kinda off canon as well. But, like, just Tolkien's work, and Christopher Tolkien's work, I do think you're more like, you're gonna get something good no matter what you pick up. Whereas Star Wars, I think, is maybe more fun overall, but you can really hit just a dud. So, yeah, Tolkien stood on business. Completely established world heading in. Um, yeah, yeah, 100%. So, um, uh, yeah, y'all can call me out if this is cheating, but I'm gonna count that as a question. Star Wars or Lord of the Rings is better. All right. So, what else we got here? Oh, okay. I'm skipping that. It's a question about Lord of the Rings quotes, and I don't know enough by memory, but there's good ones. Oh man, there's some in here that I'm gonna look like an idiot if I don't answer these right. What else do we got? Actually, I'm surprised some of these are not as approachable questions as I expected from the Star Wars thread, but that is okay. What is the order of the Lord of the Rings? Fun fact about The Hobbit, if you've ever talked to me about it, I like to say this fact that the extended editions of The Hobbit, that it takes me longer to watch the movies than it does to read the book because of how much they stretch that out. So I legitimately read the book faster than watching the three movies extended edition. So that's a that's a fun fact. Man, these questions are either so generic that they're not fun, or they're so involved that it'd be like asking me quantum physics. Lord of the Rings, to that point, John, has some strong fans who know that lore inside and out. I'm definitely more familiar with Star Wars lore than Lord of the Rings. Um, I can stand my ground with Star Wars for quite a while, but Lord of the Rings, I'm more of a listener for sure. So maybe that's why these questions are hard. Yeah. Is it necessary to read The Hobbit before Lord of the Rings? Nope. No, it is not. It is one of those questions of is it more enriching? John, you missed this question earlier about watching Star Wars chronologically or not. Um, I said release order, and I would say the same is probably true for written media. A great example is, yeah, you've got opinions. I know you do, but I maintain it, and I gave my reasons earlier, but solidified, it's ironed out. A really good example of this as I think the best case of this debate is the Chronicles of Narnia book series, because the technical order is different than the release order. Kind of like Star Wars, because they went back and added 4, 5, 6. So that's kind of like, I guess, kind of cheating in a way. It was the first three, but then he shifted it. But Narnia is similar, where uh, book one is The Magician's Nephew, but the first published book is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And there's a couple more out of order in there. Oh, I'm gonna get that wrong. I need to be careful. They're not published in the order that you're supposed to read them, and it's the only situation where I actually read them in the order that they're numbered, not release order. And I think in that case, that's because the author seemed to fully endorse the numbered order versus the release order. You're supposed to start with The Magician's Nephew. You don't have to. I think a lot of people never read that one. And even when they made the movies, they started with book 2 and then did book 4 and book 5. if you've watched the recent adaptations. And even if you haven't watched the recent adaptations, they still didn't start with book 1. So that's a weird one where it's kinda connected, but kinda not at the same time. So, um, and Chronicles of Narnia is a really good case for adjusting orders, but yeah, to pull it back to the real question here, I don't think you need to read The Hobbit first. I think it it enriches the first act of Lord I guess later too, because Bilbo's in it too. You get a better understanding of Bilbo and maybe Frodo's heritage and why this call to adventure might be part of his history and his story, and Gandalf's relationships too. And there's just stuff that's expanded more, but The Hobbit really does read more like a children's book. And The Lord of the Rings, I've attempted it. I have not finished it, but I've read enough to tell you that they read different. So that's different. That's an interesting part too. Is they're kind of for different audiences in some sense, um, which is why even though I don't like the over CGI nature of the Hobbit trilogy, it does feel more like a children's trilogy than The Lord of the Rings, and The Hobbit feels more like a children's book than The Lord of the Rings, um, which is maybe a slight workaround apologetics approach to The Hobbit being fine. I think they're fine movies, but they don't come close to Lord of the Rings. Um, no, I don't think you need to read it first, but um, it might enrich it. And bearing in mind, I have not finished reading The Lord of the Rings, but I have read all The Hobbit. So, um, what is the combined length of the Lord of the Rings extended editions? I think it's 12 hours. Is it 11 hours and 44 minutes or something like that? What is it? 11 hours and 55 minutes. So there you go. I have, that was more just to see if I could like really do that. I was close. I was off by 11 minutes. I'm really proud of myself there. I didn't get that much excited about many of the other questions before this. Um, Man, what if H.P. Lovecraft wrote The Lord of the Rings? That's an interesting question. My gut response was like he wouldn't. That just wouldn't come across his mind. Um, it might have some racist undertones. It would have a lot more ethereal and emotive descriptions versus actual descriptions. There'd be no songs, I don't think. Um, and it would have a unhappy ending, and reality would be questioned of what exists anymore, and maybe some uh, it'd be cosmic horror. It's interesting. I've heard some people say there's a really fun like it's not a thought experiment. What is it? Like a hypothetical where people say, okay, who would you rather direct a Star Wars movie? Would you rather see a Jordan Peele Star Wars movie or a Wes Anderson Star Wars movie? These questions are fun for me, like direct, and they have full permission to make what they want. Um, these are fun. Like, what would this type of creator make? You can do it with books too. Like, how do you like this one? How would a Lovecraft Lord of the Rings look? They're fun for me. The question, like I said, that I really like though is for Star Wars movies. Um, who would you like to see direct one? And this is really interesting because it seemed like for a while Quentin Tarantino was really close to directing a Star Trek movie. I don't know how much of that was rumor mill, but it seemed like he was actually having legitimate conversations about making it one of his films. And I think that's like, especially for franchises that are struggling, like Star Trek and Star Wars are both. Star Wars, I think, is doing better, but they both kind of sit on the edge of like, can the films really stay profitable? At that point, it's like, yeah, give Tarantino a Star Trek movie. Why not? And Christopher Nolan almost did a James Bond movie one time, but he wanted full creative control. And if you know anything about the rights to those movies, the Broccoli family, that's their name, had like executive say. And Nolan operates pretty much in a I get executive say way. It's that tour approach. But now Amazon Studios owns Lord of the Rings. No, they don't. Oh wait, that was a verbal typo, whatever those are called. They do make Lord of the Rings content, but I meant to say Amazon Studios owns MGM and James Bond now. So there's rumors that they might give Nolan permission to make whatever version of James Bond he wants. So that's cool to think about as well. Um, yeah, just stuff like that's exciting to me. That was a question. Jeez, I'm totally gonna be off with these numbers by the end. Mm, 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 mm. Very excited for Nolan's Odyssey. I am too. I really hope it's good. I mean, he doesn't make bad movies, so I shouldn't say that. He's my favorite director. Um, I think I'm mostly curious if it's going to be a straight adaptation or interpretive. So he always does weird stuff with his directing style. So I just super curious. But I think if there's any director that you can trust to make a good movie, it's him. Denis Villeneuve as well, with all his amazing movies. His just don't make money. Dune's like the first one to turn a profit. But um, yeah, I'm excited for Nolan's Odyssey as well, and I think he's going to do a really, really good job. I'll just be curious, kind of what his spin or what his take is on it. But yeah, I think it'll be good. And let's see. Also, if you're in the comments, I'm open to non-questions, but categorical, like categories to talk about too. We're closing in. We're coming down to the last like 15 questions. So I'm fine with categories as well. I'm going to pull back to a couple more therapy related questions as well. Let me go to therapy requests or question requests. So on Quora, if you're not familiar, I think I said this earlier, but people can request to watch or have you answer certain questions. So like your name will come up and then like I want this person to answer them. So I get a lot of those specifically when I am using it more. It slows slower right now, but then it spikes when I'm on more people request questions. So I think I have like 96 or 92 unanswered questions on here. So um, it's a lot. So let's see. I feel like I need to start being picky now that I'm getting so close to the end here, but I don't. Um, Why, after working with a great therapist for 20 years, have I not been able to form a secure attachment with her? Oof, and that's pretty weighted. That's a lot of time. 28 years. 20 years. Um, I wonder what you mean by secure attachment. Because we should feel safe with them, but we don't want them to become our main attachment figure, the therapist. We definitely don't want the therapist to be the main attachment figure. There are times where it makes sense to see someone for 20 years. If you're going weekly, that's interesting to me. Because my question is, what have we not figured out by that time? It makes sense to go for a long time, especially if you're undoing trauma and almost redesigning your life. But 20 years, and then to say you don't feel, I mean, you said secure attachment, but I'm assuming you also don't feel connected. Man, I wonder what your therapist feels because they got to be picking up on that. This is so much in here. That needs a conversation with you and your therapist or a face-to-face talk with someone. That's tough. Um, I don't know why. I don't know why that's not happening, but John, thank you for coming. Um, yeah, I appreciate you being here. Yeah, go listen to the Star Wars sections because I think you'll enjoy that well enough. So yeah, thanks for being here, man. I'll see ya. Can a therapist tell their adult client during a session that their parent is babying them? I think you'd want to be careful with maybe your verbiage. This is again going back to not wanting to just like tell people things. So that'd be more of a curiosity as the therapist expressing like, hey, it sounds like this, or from what I'm hearing, it's this, because you're also only getting one side. So unless the parent is in the session, it could just be the client is describing it in a way that it's true for what they feel like, but not true for what's actually happening. Like someone's like, so and so yelled at me, and they just didn't. they were maybe annoyed and were like, "Why'd you do that?" And the other person received it as a yell. So these stories are one-sided. So as therapists, we want to be careful when we say that. And I typically lean towards, the way you're describing it, it sounds like this. I don't know the full picture. I don't see everything. Um, if this is true, I would imagine that this, and this is also probably happening. Is that true? So I think you'd want to be able to support your thesis that they're being babied. Um, um, yeah, so there's ways to maybe address your curiosity as a clinician, but I wouldn't dive in and say this is what's happening to you. There's sometimes maybe, but that's like you got to know. And I think it happens more in family and couples work when you see the other people there and you can be like, this is what that person is doing. So, hmm. What are three assumptions of brief counseling? Brief counseling. So this could be asking like the actual approach of brief counseling, like three assumptions built into this theory. I don't know what brief counseling is. There's like as a category, there is brief counseling. A lot of solution focused work is really quick. So if that's what they mean, but I'm going to answer it as what assumptions might be present in brief counseling. And I think some people might go in being like, it's going to solve my problem this quick. Probably won't, but it might give you direction. They might say, I'm going to be healed. You might not be by the end of that, especially if it's a deep issue. Um, assumptions of brief counseling. You might go in thinking you don't have to make a connection with the therapist, but if it's therapy, you need to. So some of this can stay removed and we can do a little bit more cognitive based therapy that's not very connecting. A lot of solution focused stuff is like that. So I think it just needs to be clear if you're doing brief work, like what the relationship expectation is. Because, if you're doing therapy, the connection needs to be there. If you're really just doing problem solving, you don't need a deep connection. You don't necessarily need that. Why does psychologist Jordan Peterson say that you can't be mentally healthy without a routine? I will start by saying I have not heard him say that. Doesn't mean he hasn't. Uh, and I only bring that up because I've actually listened to quite a lot of his speaking. But from what I understand about him, he does heavily encourage ordering your life. So routine comes into place of like this way. He probably more describe it as like this, like ethereal pull towards eternal evil calls you, and we answer that call if we're not partnered with the order in a way that creates congruence and alignment with the proper divine. So therefore, if you're not in alignment with that, you fall out, and who knows, you might now align with this evil thing. So I think his approach there is probably more along the lines like if you're not clearly aligned with your goal, and routines help with that. Part of my goal, I want to be healthy, therefore I sleep. I want to be fit, therefore I go to the gym. I want to be a writer, therefore I write. Like you have to make room for those. And if you're not making room, you're just scattering and leaving up to whatever influence exists to direct you somewhere else. And often the path of least resistance. And usually your goals are aligned with harder things because you have to break through a barrier to get them. So the path of least resistance is usually almost always out of alignment with your deep desires and goals because those usually are not fulfilled yet and we have to break through a barrier of some sort. So that would be my guess. That'd be my guess. Mm. What do therapists do when they don't want a client anymore? Ooh, bear in mind, we are relationship based professionals. What do you do? Think about other relationships. What do you do when you don't want a dating partner anymore? What do you do when you don't want a friend anymore? The difference is we're being paid. So normally you'd say you find a healthy way to approach, why it's not working for you. The issue is therapy is not about us. It's about the other person. Um, This is actually a relatively common question for therapists. Where like, I don't like working with this person. What do I do? If it's not unethical and your safety is not threatened, keep working with them, is what I would say. If you can keep helping them, it might just not be as fun for you. You don't have to absolutely love every case, but if you're useful, you need to be useful. Um, and if you are just in your mind treating them poor, like if you can't ethically work with them, you need to do supervision and get yourself checked on that. Um, and then you're gonna have to work with a supervisor to find an appropriate way to ethically remove yourself from that dynamic. I do think if you absolutely just, I can't stand them, I need to separate, you do have an ethical obligation to separate because you're no longer offering good work. But with that separation should also be coming intentional care on yourself with another professional to make sure you are figuring out why that was such a problem. And again, this is assuming safety is not a concern. This is assuming scope of practice isn't a concern. Scope and safety, different routes. But just I don't want a client anymore. Um, yeah, you kind of just got to deal with that. Really navigate it with guidance with other people because there's probably little details in there that give you a clear answer of where to go. It's really hard for me just to say, do this, do that. How do I move on with a new therapist when I keep thinking of my old therapist? Yeah, again, it's same way you handle other relationships as a starting point. Um, Probably need to work through the grief of the last therapist still if you're going back to that. Like, it's not the same, you're right. They might not even do as good of a job, but they just need to do enough. Um, you might not click enough. I think just be open with your therapist, like, "Hey, man, nothing against you," or "Hey," I mean, I say "Hey, man" to girls too, I guess, but, "Hey, I'm not connecting the way I did with my old therapist, and I like, this it sucks, and I don't think you're doing a bad job, but this is hard." If they're doing okay and you actually trust they have your best interest in mind, then maybe they're safe enough to look at and say, "I need to process out that, like, I miss the other person." That could be really useful to, um, work through. So, question 96. Do you agree with Joy Behar that the most functional member of a family is the one who's in therapy? Absolutely not. Do I agree with that? It's maybe the truth. But you being in therapy is not predictive of you being functional or by any means the most functional in your family. That's a big misconception. You could even make a better argument that they lean lower functioning because they need to go to therapy. I think that risks being super dismissive of why someone might go to therapy. But if you're totally good, you don't need it. Plain and simple. I don't believe everyone needs to go to therapy. I actually think there are probably a lot less people need to go, and we would be fine with less clinicians overall. Overall, and there's better uh, solutions sometimes than reasons why people go to therapy. But no, I mean, I've I've known people who essentially use the fact that they go to therapy as the reason why they're a jerk. They're like, I'm in therapy, or my therapist said it. It's like, yeah, just chill out. Like, it's almost like this. It's it's almost like someone that drives a Prius and then tells you why you're ruining the environment with your choices. They're like, "Well, I drive Prius, I don't," and then they, like, litter. Like, sometimes people feel like that, where it's like, you go to therapy, but you're being really abusive right now. You're pretending that's because 'cause you're smart. This is actually something that, a lot of new therapists have to deal with. I think almost every therapist has a phase where they have to check this, where you're learning how to be a therapist, and then you come home and you behave like a therapist to your whole family. And everyone knows you're doing it and everyone hates it and you're just oblivious. So I had my phase of that. Everyone kind of has a phase where they have to learn how to keep that in check. It's also, I think one of the reasons why a lot of therapists who start their therapy program married get divorced. I think some of them, there's real reasons, but some of them kind of act like, well, I just learned more about. I think a lot of you just become awful to be around. Um, so you have to keep that in check. And I think going to therapy can do that as well. Just like if you go get a personal trainer and then now you're telling everyone, like, actually, your squat should be like this. Like, come on. You can take what you learn, but you need to be really self aware. It's different why I'm a therapist, so the way I speak. I mean, not use that example. I've had a personal trainer before, and I've used that input to help other people with workouts, but it's never an I'm right. It's like this is what I learned. This is helpful, and I've continued to study that. Same with anytime I've gotten professional care, I can be like, this is my experience. This is what I learned. This is my experience. But my professional care comes nowhere close to the expertise of the person teaching me. And we have to keep in mind that our therapist is our therapist. So we might come out of therapy realizing we need to do more like journaling and we need to talk to our family with this way and set boundaries this way. But that's our work. They might not need to do that. The rest of your family might not need to do that. So a lot of people, this happens a lot on like TikTok and stuff. People say, there's like, here's what my therapist taught me that can help you. And all they do is tell you their problem because that was for them in their therapy session. That was a remember therapy is relational and confidential and private and focus on you. The advice is for you. And yet sometimes advice, geez, the input, my goodness, therapists don't give advice. The input and the direction and the therapeutic response towards your positioning is supposed to come from the therapist entirely in their response to help you get to your destination. It's not for your family, it's not for your friends. There are times where the information's true all the time. Getting adequate sleep is good for your mental health. I don't care who you are. It's good for your mental health. Now, some of you need more sleep. Some of you actually might be sleeping too much. It's the individual relationship that we can identify. What's your sleep looking like? Where's your sleep at? Um, your therapist might tell you you need maybe to find new friends. Have we talked about that? These friends seem you always come and tell me this is what's happening. This is negative, negative, negative. Have you thought about new friends? Do you like how this is happening? And your takeaway might be like, oh, people need different friends, and then they get better. Well, no, you need different friends. This person has really healthy friends. So no, I don't agree with Joy Behar on that. Again, assuming she said that. I'm not going to go try to find the video. Take her name out of that. If anyone's saying that, no, it's not necessarily true, but it can be. It's subjective. Everything therapy, for the most part, has an "it depends" twist to it. 9 out of 10 of the things, 99 out of 100. Next question. Are therapists master salespeople? Ooh, that's interesting. The assumption there that we know how to mess with people's minds. Uh, most therapists I know are really bad at sales, and they actually hate it. Most people get into therapy because they care and they want to help and they want to be present. And then, so if you're not familiar, I do a ton of business development, business training, professional coaching, business coaching. I love that side of the therapy world. So I help a lot of clinicians develop their business. Um, it's unbelievably rare that any of them feel great about sales calls, let alone want to even talk about them. And it's that word sales call because it kind of isn't. It really is a it's a consultation call or it's a consultation email. But you are selling yourself, right? Kind of. My approach there is you don't sell the client. You don't try to get the client. What you do is you tell them who you are. This is what I offer. And you are inquisitive. This is what I offer. What do you need? This is where I'm at. You create curiosity around them and you understand their problem that they are believing is true. You don't have to think it's a problem. You want to understand why. And this is the question I often ask. What is happening in your life that leads you to think therapy might be a good idea? And then we dive into that. Um, and then I respond to how I might approach that. And sometimes it's like, oh, I'm gonna actually direct you this way. I'm not a good fit. Other times, hey, this is how I function in the therapy room. And actually, usually I start by repeating back. I heard you say this. I heard you say this. I understood you saying this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Does all that sound right? Yes, it sounds right. This is how I function in the therapy room. I explain how I function, and I explain how my functioning attaches to each of the problems that they laid out. And then if they think that I'm a good fit and I think that we're a good fit, we go. Therapists are not master salespeople. Most of the I if you're calling a therapist on the phone and you're like, "Oh, they're gonna try to get me just to get me through the door," um, some of them view this as every field has its professionals that view you as a number, not as a person. So those therapists do exist. Most therapists that I am around and that I talk to and work with, they're very nervous on the phone with you, and they don't wanna oversell you, and they're nervous to push it all, and so, no, I mean, you'll get both sides of that, but, because people are people, but a lot of them are really uncomfortable doing the sales call portion. Yeah, question on heat therapy, not quite what we're doing. What would you do if your therapist fell asleep while you were talking? That sucks, man. Um, there's a high chance I would never go back, right? There's gotta be a really good excuse. But even saying, "Sorry, I was so tired today," is not a good excuse because ethically, you shouldn't have come to work. So, like, therapists do have an ethical requirement to be, mentally there. So, if we're having a rough day, we actually are supposed to cancel our sessions because the tool that we use to do our work is our brain, our mind, and if we're skewed and off, we have no right to be working that day because you're not gonna get a good service. So, eh maybe narcolepsy is the only excuse I can think of that makes sense, or something's going on, like, that's really hard to bounce back from them. Yeah. Mhm. Oh, I scrolled a lot through there. Wait, I thought I had more request ones on here. I don't know, it's just not loading. We'll go back to drafts, which we've done a bit of. We're closing in, y'all. Yeah. I'll check subscriber count in a second, but we're down to the last 10. Okay. If I tell my therapist I self-harm, will she tell my parents? Uh, Implication there is that you're a minor. I say implication because there is a lot of people, if you're this category, you'll understand, but I think some people won't. There's a lot of people who are, young adults that, uh, have their parents, pay for and do a lot of the coordination for therapy. So, if you're an adult and you have your parent doing a lot of the logistical part, then the therapist, is ethically not allowed to share that. Self-harm, suicidality is different. We do separate self-harm with, um, suicidality. Self-harm can escalate to suicidal, and it can also result in an accidental death, but they are technically different, and we approach them differently. Um, so other than a suicidal intent and severe safety concern, that's not gonna get shared. Now, the assumption, if you're a minor, uh, and you're self-harming, will your parent be told? So a lot of people actually don't work with adolescents and minors, specifically like 12 to 17, because ethics, laws, regulations, statutes, state, federal, are a nightmare to navigate. And the nightmare navigation is, when are we required, required to share what we hear? And when is it ethical discretion? And it drives therapists mad to the point where they don't work with minors, and it kind of sucks, but it makes perfect sense. Um, Age of consent's a big one. Like, you have a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old dating, and teens at times have sex. So if your 16-year-old client tells you that their 17-year-old partner and them had sex, what do you do? Like, do you have to go call the cops on that? Do you tell the parents? Do you say, like, and there are technically rules on that, and they differ. Some of them are federal, but they can differ by state and ethics around that. So these are often hard questions for therapists, and one of the reasons why they don't work with uh, adolescent minors. So, um, will my therapist tell my parents if I tell my therapist that I self harm? Probably. Probably. It might depend on it'll depend on the therapist, but, um, ethically, they probably need to. It might depend on the self-harm. It's like if you're taking it's not uncommon for people to take a rubber band and snap their wrist because it hurts, but it doesn't break the skin. Some people say, "Well, does it break the skin or not?" I know I'm being a little bit graphic, but, or putting ice on your hand to burn yourself, and that's different than, um I don't wanna get too explicit. We can use our imagination here. But the therapist's job is to keep the client safe. So generally, we're gonna wanna pull the parents in. I can understand ethical consideration if we know that the parents are a huge part of the mental health issue in a negative way, and they're a huge contributing factor to the self-harming. But then we get into the question of, is there anything reportable? And the reporting guidelines are really loose too, where there's things as a normal human being, you're like, that's not appropriate, that should be reported. But according to the law, it is not abuse. So, yeah, I mean, these are always hard questions and complicated. And there's a lot of people that will act like they're not complicated. Like, this is obvious. Sometimes they are. They're usually complicated. Even if there's a clear answer when you think about it, they're still weighted. So yeah, to the question asker, yeah, your therapist is probably going to bring your parents into that. Your safety is what matters, and the more people in your support system that we can get involved to stop danger, that's usually good. When should a therapist seek help from another therapist? This is question 100. Is it really? This is question one. Wait, 101. No, 100. Sorry. Wow. When should a therapist seek help from another therapist? I think there's two ways to look at this. Are you talking about like seeking guidance or actually seeking therapy? Seeking guidance, I think any therapist, if you can afford it and you have the right person, staying in supervision your entire career is wisest. I know some people are like, what are you talking about? You should always have someone above you inputting into your life. It's always good to have a mentor. So I think a therapist should always be consulting with another therapist that's more progressed in there. That might be for the specific theory, it might be overall experience, but whatever category, there needs to be at least one category that they're further along. So they can be younger, they can even be less experienced, but just an expert in this and you're shifting expertise. But always try to have someone who's more advanced than you inputting into your professional development. We'll say clinical development for that. But when should a therapist go to therapy? Um, I think the same time as like any client should. If you just need to work through something, and some therapists go to therapy to work through stuff they hear from their clients. That gets into some ethical gray area for HIPAA compliance, but it's obviously not identifiable information when that happens. And I've never gone for that or had a client that is that. I've had therapists as clients, and as a therapist, I've gone to be a client to a therapist. So it's just if you need to work through something the same way anyone else would, you go do it. I think the hard part is it can feel embarrassing or scary as a therapist to go to another therapist because that's a colleague and you're sharing deep thoughts. And the more advanced I get in my career, so um, I have now supervised many students. I've now given professional guidance to dozens of other therapists. I'm going to be offering more trainings here soon. So if there's a social hierarchy ladder of therapists, I'm moving up that. Why is that relevant? Because it limits the amount of people I can then go to therapy for. If somebody looks up to me as an educator, as a supervisor, as a teacher, I can't go to them for therapy because it confuses the role. Um, so it then limits who I can see. So I think that's an issue sometimes too. So therapists, I think, have to be more careful when they're picking their own therapist. It's probably not a bad idea to find an out-of-state therapist who's licensed in your state and do it remotely. So, um, yeah. Okay. Let me double check subscribers. I did not expect this live stream to blow up, but I did wonder if there'd be maybe like one or two new subscribers, but there's none, and that's okay. So saves me time. So we're not going to stress about that. Okay. So that means 2 more questions. Uh, man, I feel like I need to, like, go out on a or go out with a bang, but I don't. I know there's some of you watching right now. There's a couple people watching. I would love a comment to end this with. So, if you're one of the currently very few people in here, um, I'd love a final question. I have 2 questions I have to answer. I'm gonna find one more question, and if you're listening and wanna comment, do it. You don't have to, but I'd prefer to end on a posted question, but I'll look for my penultimate one real quick. This is an interesting one. Where did it go? Is it ethical for a therapist to tell their spouse about a patient? That's a big, topic. It really shouldn't be a big topic 'cause it's not that complicated. The answer is no. Wait, is it ethical? It's not ethical. Jeez, I thought I, like no, you shouldn't tell your spouse about your patients. I think the temptation for a lot of people is just their temptation with how they talk about patients to anyone, but I think there's a higher temptation for the person, your spouse, who you're technically the point of a spouse is you trust them the most with everything in your life, so if you're having a rough go, you share with them the difficulties that you're having. I do think that is one of the reasons to stay in supervision. If you have hard clients or rough days, you take that to a supervisor. That's why I think even if you are clinically licensed and don't need a supervisor, you should still have one, because you might have something that comes up and you want to share it, and that's the person to go to. It's technically appropriate to share de-identified information with someone. There's also a question of, like, how much do you really wanna give that to your spouse? And, I might tell my wife about, like, "This was hard today," or, very light details about something that happened with the case, or why I'm drained, or why I'm excited, or this went well, or this didn't, or, very light details that are de-identified, and ideally, my standard for de-identified, it's a hard standard, but I think it's a helpful standard, is if the client themselves read the words or heard you say it, they wouldn't be able to know it was them that you're talking about. That's really good for de-identified is they could hear you say it and not make the connection that it's about them. And then you can argue, well, is that so de-identified that it's disconnected? Kinda, yeah. Yeah, it is. Okay. Final question, I think. And I was checking on well, I don't want to mess with that. I wish in the live stream, and maybe you can, I just haven't learned, you could look at subscriber count, but I don't think you can. So, and that's fine. Doesn't need to be that way. Whoops. Um, doesn't need to be that way. So, all right, we'll just go into the last random question. You know what? I'm gonna ask myself a question. Oh wait. Oh, there it is. One came in. Look at that timing. Thanks, Melissa. If you could pick anyone, dead or alive, to do therapy with, who would you pick? Ooh, I thought it was gonna be to like interact with. Um, to have as a therapist or do therapy. Oh, those are totally different questions. Totally different. Um, I feel like you got to go with Jesus for the having therapy or having him as your therapist. It's pretty much a home run hit right there. As the uh put a little star, that's 102 questions. We're doing 103 because you asked two at the end. Um, and I still think when I go back to count these later, I'm not gonna have nailed it. We'll see. It'll be a miracle if I got it perfectly right. But hopefully I went over. But who would I want to do therapy with if I could pick anyone? Who would I want as a client? Dead or alive? That's a really good question. I'm gonna probably go ahead and end up giving an answer that might not be my for sure answer, like if I really thought about it, but someone who I think would be interesting to do. Um, yeah, Probably Alexander Solzhenitsyn would be a fantastic person. So he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, which is some people have said that's like the reason the Soviet Union doesn't exist, is it totally broke the barrier of what was going on in their gulags and in their communist setup. Um, but this dude just, I don't know. Like I said, it might not be my number one answer, but he went through some stuff. Like I don't know if I could handle being his therapist. I think he'd probably look at me and be like, "You have no clue what you're doing." But I think um, just hearing his story and working through what happened would be probably one of the scariest adventures I could ever go on, and I think that'd be fascinating. So we'll end with that question on a very reflective, somberly reflective note. But thank you. That was a good question. I've actually never thought of that before. Um, that's it. We did it. One question per subscriber. We'll double check right now. Is that it? So at least I think it was 103 questions. So I hope I actually answered that many when I count back. But that's it. That's the stream. Clocking in at just over 3 hours and 45 minutes. Um, I'm going to go eat and do some form of nothing productive now because that was a lot. But I had actually had a lot of fun doing this, and I don't know what I'll do in the future. I hope maybe one day we'll hit 1,000 and do something more fun. But my goal now is just to get back to the channel like normal. I'm looking forward to about 10 days from now to do my kind of 1 year anniversary Monday Musing, my 52-week mark. I might do it on the 53rd week, I guess, to start the new year, but it's really fun. So this was more fun than I expected, more doable than I expected. My voice hurts, but we're here. So thank you to everyone who's been in the chat, especially those of you who chatted. I'm very content with any of you who just watched, totally fine, but definitely made it exciting to be able to talk with some of you. Anyone who watches this after, thank you for taking the time. You're out of your mind if you watched all this from start to finish. Kudos to you. So yeah, this is great. And thank you all so much for being here. And we'll go ahead and call it there, and I'll see you all on the regular routine. See ya.